Back in 586 BC, humanity stood on the brink of witnessing the most savage siege the ancient world had ever known, one that would forever alter the trajectory of human history. The catalyst? A dream that left a pagan ruler utterly bewildered. This marks the precise moment when the God of Israel would employ the world's most dominant empire to bring his timeless prophecies to fruition, triggering a sequence of events whose echoes would resonate throughout all eternity. Tonight, as you ease into slumber, you'll traverse the entire biblical chronicle of Babylon, starting from Nimrod's defiant tower, moving through Nebuchadnezzar's statue of gold, continuing to Daniel's ordeal in the lion's den, and reaching the enigmatic inscription that appeared on Belshazzar's wall. Every military campaign, every prophetic utterance, every divine act of intervention that molded this fabled empire lies waiting for you within the sacred texts. Before we begin, though, why not tap that like button and hit subscribe if you haven't done so yet? Your engagement allows us to keep delivering content designed to help you relax or discover something fascinating. Oh, and share with us your location and current time. We're cultivating a worldwide community right here, giving you the chance to connect with others who share your interests from every corner of the globe. So then, without any further delay, shall we dive into today's narrative. In the very beginning, a river existed. Long before urban centers emerged from the dust, before monarchs adorned themselves with golden crowns, there existed water. Two waterways carved their paths through an infinite desert, bringing forth something extraordinary. The Tigris and Euphrates snaked like twin serpents across the barren terrain, cradling life within their muddy currents. Imagine this primordial landscape. No pathways, no barriers, no sacred structures stretching skyward, only water flowing steadily across sand and rock. Season upon season, century upon century, these rivers transported far more than simple moisture. They carried the very essence of possibility. Wherever these waters made contact with the soil, something awakened. Vegetation burst through earth that had previously known only lifelessness. Creatures arrived to drink, then chose to remain. Slowly, humanity tracked the animal herds, pursuing the prospect of greenery flourishing where only brown barrenness had existed previously. The territory situated between these rivers bore a name destined to echo across the ages: Mesopotamia. In the most ancient language, it signifies between the rivers, straightforward words for a location that would give birth to civilization as we know it. Within this cradle nourished by flowing water, humankind would take its initial steps toward urban development, legal systems, and narratives preserved in stone. Each spring, the floods arrived with predictable regularity. Waters would swell, overflow their banks, and blanket the level plain. Upon their retreat, they deposited fertile, dark earth, a present from the faraway mountains where these rivers commenced their voyage. This mud possessed a certain magic. Seeds sown here would flourish tall and robust. The earliest inhabitants learned to interpret the waters. They observed the heavens, sensed the wind's direction, and anticipated when the flooding would occur. They constructed their initial dwellings on elevated terrain, awaiting the water's annual gift. Afterward, they would wade into the yielding mud, scattering seeds destined to become their crops. The rivers imparted lessons in patience. Water progresses slowly, yet it never ceases. It discovers roots around barriers, cuts fresh channels when previous ones prove inadequate. The inhabitants learn to adopt water's mindset, remaining persistent, flexible, eternally flowing toward their objectives. One generation after another, families returned to identical locations along the riverbanks. They started recognizing patterns within the landscape, within the seasons, within the water's behavior. This understanding became their initial treasure, transmitted through tales recounted beside firelight, through melodies hummed during planting seasons. Time progressed like the rivers themselves, consistent, unhurried, perpetually advancing. The population expanded in both numbers and understanding. They mastered cooperation, learned to distribute the flood's abundance, constructed their existence around the pattern of ascending and descending waters. Young ones frolicked in the shallow areas, while their elders cultivated the rich fields. They splashed about and laughed, completely unaware they inhabited the genesis of something remarkable. Their playful activities in the mud served as training for the magnificent works their future generations would construct, sacred buildings and royal residences, gardens and towers that would nearly touch the clouds. The desert observed and remained patient. Beyond the verdant ribbons following the rivers, immense emptiness extended toward every horizon. Yet the inhabitants had discovered their paradise within this slender band of vitality. They possessed water, fertile soil, and open sky. What additional requirements could they possibly have? When night arrived, after labor concluded and families assembled around modest fires, the elders would share stories. They described the rivers as divine entities, the floods as celestial presence, their small area of greenery as hallowed ground. These narratives would evolve and transform, yet their essence would stay constant. Appreciation for water within a parched land. The stars overhead mirrored themselves in the slow-moving rivers, forming a duplicate sky beneath. The inhabitants learned to interpret these nocturnal patterns as well, tracking time through the shifting of luminous points of light. The celestial realm and the waters transformed into their earliest books, instructing them regarding cycles, regarding structure, regarding the magnificence of phenomena that recur repeatedly. Within this tranquil location, situated between flowing waters under boundless sky, the initial seeds of something magnificent were planted. Not merely the seeds of grain destined to nourish bodies, but the seeds of concepts destined to nourish souls. The rivers had bestowed them with life. Shortly, they would bestow life upon cities, upon laws, upon narratives that would survive the very stones they would learn to carve. The water continued its flow, transporting their aspirations toward the sea, toward the future, toward tomorrow brimming with potential. From Sumer to Akkad, the rivers maintained their commitment. Wherever water contacted earth, life flourished. Modest settlements expanded into villages, villages into towns. Inhabitants learned to mold clay into vessels, to weave reeds into containers, to fabricate tools that assisted them in taming the untamed territory. In the southern region, where the rivers decelerated and dispersed through wetlands, an extraordinary people surfaced. They identified themselves as the Sumerians, and they would instruct the world regarding communal urban living. Their narrative commences with mud. The identical rich clay that sustained their agriculture became the cornerstone of their civilization. The Sumerians gazed upon the level landscape and perceived opportunity. They excavated channels to direct water wherever they desired it to flow. They constructed elevated platforms to raise their dwellings above the floods. Most significantly, they mastered collaborative work on undertakings too immense for any single family to accomplish independently. Their earliest cities arose like islands emerging from the marshland. Uruk, Lagash, names that murmur of ancient magnificence even today. Each city represented a miracle of cooperation. Thousands of individuals selecting to reside and labor together for collective benefit. They erected walls for defense, temples for their deities, and marketplaces where agricultural workers and artisans could exchange their merchandise. At each city's center towered a ziggurat, an enormous step tower ascending toward the heavens. These weren't merely structures. They were prayers constructed from brick and binding material. The Sumerians held the belief that their gods inhabited the sky, and the ziggurats served as stairways for divine descents to earth. The most astonishing innovation emerged from their requirement to maintain records. As cities grew substantial, inhabitants needed to monitor who possessed what, who was indebted to whom, and what quantity of grain was preserved for difficult times. The Sumerians impressed wedge-shaped markings into soft clay tablets, establishing the world's inaugural writing system. They labeled it cuneiform, and it would safeguard their thoughts for thousands of years. These clay tablets convey wonderful narratives. Some document commercial transactions and tax obligations, the functional aspects of everyday existence. Others safeguard epic accounts of champions and gods, of floods and conflicts, of affection and grief. The Sumerians became the first civilization to transcribe their aspirations and render them everlasting. Their cities hummed with energy. Clay workers spun clay into exquisite containers. Textile makers fashioned fabrics that would be exchanged across continents. Metal craftsmen discovered how to merge copper and tin, producing bronze more durable than either metal individually. The Sumerians embodied inventors, artists, and visionaries simultaneously. They also bestowed upon the world its inaugural schools. Young apprentice scribes would sit for extended periods practicing their cuneiform characters on clay tablets. They acquired mathematics, literature, and the appropriate methods for conducting commerce. Education represented the pathway to progress in Sumerian culture, and knowledge was valued beyond gold. However, the Sumerians weren't the sole inhabitants of Mesopotamia. In the northern territories, Semitic populations had established themselves along the rivers, absorbing lessons from their southern counterparts while cultivating their own customs. The most prosperous of these northern groups were the Akkadians, guided by a king whose name continues to resonate with authority, Sargon. Sargon of Akkad entered the world in modest circumstances, yet he envisioned greatness. Legend recounts that he was discovered as an infant floating in a basket upon the river, rescued and nurtured by a gardener. Whether this account holds truth or not, it captures something essential about Sargon. He embodied a man who ascended from nothing to reshape the world. Approximately 2334 BCE, Sargon conquered the Sumerian cities sequentially, establishing history's inaugural genuine empire. He unified the northern and southern regions under Akkadian governance, distributing his language and traditions throughout Mesopotamia. For the initial time, the land situated between the rivers fell under a single king's authority. The Akkadian Empire introduced fresh vitality to the ancient world. Sargon's military forces marched beyond Mesopotamia, transporting their culture to far-off territories. Trading pathways extended from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. Concepts flowed as unrestricted as merchandise, generating an abundant mixture of traditions and innovations. Sargon's capital, Akkad, transformed into a legend on its own merit. Although archaeologists haven't located its precise position, ancient writings portray it as a city of marvels, featuring palaces and temples that competed with anything the world had previously witnessed. It functioned as a melting pot where Sumerian knowledge encountered Akkadian drive. The empire endured for exceeding 150 years, with Sargon's offspring governing from their splendid capital. They constructed roadways, standardized weights and measurements, and established the inaugural postal system. The Akkadians demonstrated that varied populations could coexist under equitable laws, distributing prosperity and safeguarding one another from external dangers. Yet, all empires encountered obstacles. Climate transformation brought drought to the northern territories. Uprisings ignited in remote provinces. Fresh populations pressed against the frontiers, pursuing their own portion of the prosperous land. The Akkadian Empire ultimately fragmented, yet its legacy persisted. The Sumerians and Akkadians had demonstrated to the world what became achievable when populations collaborated. They had accepted the river's gift and multiplied it 1,000-fold, establishing cities, laws, artistic works, and literature that would motivate civilizations for millennia ahead. During the peaceful evening hours, after the day's labor concluded, inhabitants in these ancient cities would assemble to hear narratives of their forebears. They spoke of the era before cities, when their ancestors maintained simple existences beside the riverside. Those days appeared impossibly remote now, resembling memories from a vision. The rivers continued flowing, transporting their ancient commitments. Yet now they flowed past barriers and towers, through channels carved by human effort, serving cities that had expanded far beyond anything the initial settlers could have conceived. The seeds planted by flowing water had matured into a forest of human accomplishment. Hammurabi's Golden Dawn. Time flowed like the rivers themselves, transporting fresh populations and fresh aspirations into Mesopotamia. The Akkadian Empire had disintegrated, and for generations the territory experienced conflict. City battled city, kingdom ascended and descended, and the inhabitants yearned for tranquility. Then, within the city of Babylon, a youthful prince named Hammurabi rose to the throne. Babylon hadn't yet become the marvel of the world it was destined to become. When Hammurabi inherited the crown approximately 1792 BCE, his kingdom remained small, encircled by more formidable neighbors. Other monarchs dismissed him as merely another insignificant king in a territory abundant with minor kingdoms. They would discover how mistaken they were. Hammurabi possessed something uncommon among rulers: patience. While other kings rushed into conflict, he waited, observed, and strategized. He comprehended that genuine power originated not from military strength alone, but from the devotion of populations who believed their king concerned himself with their well-being. The youthful king devoted his early years, strengthening Babylon from its core. He reconstructed temples, enhanced the city's fortifications, and most significantly, listened to his people's worries. Merchants voiced complaints about unjust trading practices. Agricultural workers expressed anxiety about water rights. Families pursued justice when they suffered wrongs. Hammurabi heard them all and started envisioning a superior approach. His chance arrived when the power equilibrium shifted across Mesopotamia. The kingdom of Larsa dominated the south, while Eshnunna maintained influence in the north. These two powers remained locked in a conflict that depleted both. Hammurabi observed and awaited the ideal moment to respond. When that moment materialized, Hammurabi attacked with unexpected swiftness and expertise. His military forces were well-trained and disciplined, yet more significantly, they fought for a king who had gained their admiration. City following city opened its gates to Babylonian forces, not from terror, but from expectation for the justice Hammurabi had promised. The conquest of Larsa in 1763 BCE signaled the authentic beginning of Babylon's golden era. Hammurabi had consolidated most of Mesopotamia under his governance, forming an empire that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean trading routes. However, conquest represented merely the commencement of his vision. What rendered Hammurabi genuinely great wasn't his military achievement, but his actions following victory. Rather than governing through terror, he selected to administer through law. He grasped that an empire constructed on justice would endure longer than one constructed on the sword exclusively. The king established his capital in Babylon, transforming it from a modest city into a magnificent metropolis. Fresh temples arose to honor the gods, their walls shimmering with glazed brick and valuable metals. The renowned Ishtar Gate, although constructed by subsequent kings, originated in Hammurabi's vision of Babylon as a city deserving of divine blessing. Commerce prospered under Hammurabi's governance. Merchants from remote territories came to Babylon's markets, delivering exotic merchandise and fresh concepts. The city transformed into a crossroads of culture, where Sumerian traditions blended with Akkadian innovations, producing something fresh and dynamic. Yet Hammurabi's greatest accomplishment wasn't constructed of brick and binding material. It was carved in stone and inscribed in the hearts of his population. The king devoted years developing a comprehensive legal code that would guarantee justice for all his subjects, from the most elevated noble to the most humble servant. The code addressed everything from trading disputes to family concerns, from property rights to criminal justice. It established explicit punishments for wrongdoing and protections for the innocent. Most remarkably, it acknowledged that different circumstances demand different responses, a revolutionary concept for its era. Hammurabi personally supervised the formation of his legal masterwork. He consulted with judges, priests, merchants, and agricultural workers, guaranteeing that his laws reflected the genuine needs of his population. The code wasn't imposed from overhead, but developed from the foundation upward, anchored in the daily experiences of those who would exist under its guidance. Upon the law's completion, Hammurabi commanded them carved on enormous stone pillars identified as stelae. These monuments were positioned in temples and public squares throughout the empire, guaranteeing that everyone could know their rights and responsibilities. The law would no longer remain a mystery known exclusively to the powerful. The king's personal words, safeguarded in the prologue to his code, disclose his vision. When the exalted Anu, king of the Anunnaki, and Enlil, lord of heaven and earth, who determines the destinies of the land, determined for Marduk, the firstborn of Ea, the Enlil functions over all humankind, made him great among the Igigi, called Babylon by its exalted name, made it supreme in the world, established for him in its midst an enduring kingship whose foundations are as firm as heaven and earth. At that time, Anu and Enlil named me Hammurabi, the exalted prince, the reverent one, to cause justice to prevail in the land. The population of Babylon responded to their king's wisdom with unprecedented loyalty and prosperity. Criminal activity decreased as potential wrongdoers understood they would encounter swift and certain justice. Commerce increased as merchants could depend on consistent laws across the empire. Families felt secure, understanding their rights were protected by written law. Hammurabi governed for 43 years, and his reign transformed into the benchmark by which subsequent kings would be evaluated. He had accepted a small kingdom and transformed it into the greatest power in the known world. More significantly, he had demonstrated that genuine greatness originated not from conquest exclusively, but from the wisdom to govern effectively. As the king matured, he could gaze out from his palace windows at the city he had constructed and the empire he had formed. The rivers continued flowing past Babylon's walls, transporting trade, merchandise, and diplomatic communications to remote territories. The god Marduk's temple rose majestically above the city, its golden peak capturing the initial rays of dawn. During the quiet moments before sleep, Hammurabi might have contemplated the journey that had transported him from a minor prince to the ruler of an empire. He had succeeded not through brutality or fortune, but through patient wisdom and genuine concern for his people's welfare. His laws would survive him, his city would expand even greater, and his name would be remembered as long as humans valued justice. The golden dawn of Babylon had commenced, and its illumination would shine across the ancient world for generations ahead. The code. In the courtyard, within the heart of Babylon, where merchants bargained and children frolicked, stood an enormous pillar of black stone, taller than 3 men, blanketed in tiny wedge-shaped markings. It attracted curious crowds daily. This wasn't any ordinary monument. It represented Hammurabi's code, the world's inaugural comprehensive written law, displayed for all to observe and comprehend. The pillar itself constituted a work of artistic merit. At its summit, carved in relief, the god Shamash sat upon his throne, flames dancing from his shoulders as he handed the symbols of justice to King Hammurabi. Beneath this divine scene, 282 laws were etched in cuneiform script, each one meticulously crafted to address the genuine problems individuals faced in their daily existence. The laws encompassed everything conceivable. A farmer whose crops suffered damage by a neighbor's wandering ox could discover remedy here. A merchant deceived in a commercial deal could pursue justice. A woman wronged by her husband could uncover her rights. The code addressed rich and poor alike, although it acknowledged the social realities of ancient times. Among the most renowned principles carved in stone was an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This phrase, which would resonate through history, represented something revolutionary for its era. the concept that punishment should correspond to the crime. Before Hammurabi, justice frequently meant revenge, with penalties far surpassing the original wrong. The code introduced proportion and logic to the administration of justice. Yet the laws possessed more nuance than this simple phrase indicates. The code recognized different classes of individuals and tailored punishments accordingly. A blow struck against a nobleman carried a weightier penalty than the identical act against a commoner. While this appears unjust by contemporary standards, it represented a major advance in legal thinking. The concept that circumstances matter in determining justice. The economic laws disclose a sophisticated grasp of commerce. The code regulated interest rates, preventing moneylenders from charging excessive fees that would ensnare borrowers in debt. It established standard weights and measures, guaranteeing fair trade across the empire. It protected widows and orphans from exploitation, recognizing that society's most vulnerable members required special safeguards. Family law occupied a substantial portion of the code, reflecting the central significance of household relationships in Babylonian society. Marriage, divorce, inheritance, and adoption were all carefully regulated. The laws protected women's property rights in ways that were progressive for the ancient world, while also maintaining traditional family structures. Perhaps most remarkably, the code incorporated laws protecting slaves from excessive brutality. While it accepted slavery as a reality of life, it established boundaries on how slaves could be treated and provided pathways for them to reclaim their freedom. This recognition of basic human dignity, even for the lowest members of society, distinguished Babylon from many of its neighbors. The process of forming these laws proved as significant as their substance. Hammurabi didn't simply dictate them from his throne. Instead, he consulted with judges, priests, and community leaders throughout his empire. He studied the legal traditions of the populations he had conquered, incorporating the finest elements of each into his comprehensive code. Local courts throughout the empire utilized the code as their guide. Judges were obligated to know the laws and apply them consistently, regardless of their personal opinions or local customs. This standardization of justice was revolutionary. For the initial time in history, a person could know what to anticipate from the legal system, no matter where they resided within the empire. The physical placement of the code's stone copies was carefully planned. They stood in temple courtyards where populations gathered for festivals, in market squares where merchants conducted commerce, and near city gates where travelers could learn the laws of the territory they were entering. The law was rendered genuinely public, accessible to anyone who could read or who could locate someone to read it for them. Scribes fabricated clay tablet copies of the most significant laws, rendering them even more broadly available. These tablets were preserved in schools, government offices, and private residences. Legal education transformed into part of general education, with young individuals learning not just how to read and write, but what their rights and responsibilities were as citizens. The code also fulfilled a religious purpose. Ancient populations believed that beneficial laws originated from the gods, and Hammurabi presented his code as divinely inspired. The image of Shamash, handing the symbols of justice to the king, reinforced this concept. Following the law wasn't merely a civil duty, it was a religious obligation. The practical effects of the code were immediate and profound. Criminal rates declined as potential wrongdoers realized they would face certain punishment. Commerce flourished as merchants could depend on consistent legal protections. Families felt more secure, understanding their rights were clearly defined and protected. The code's influence extended far beyond Hammurabi's lifetime and empire. Future rulers would model their own legal systems on his pioneering work. The Hebrew Bible's legal codes demonstrate clear influence from Hammurabi's principles. Roman law, which would subsequently govern much of the world, constructed upon foundations initially laid in ancient Babylon. Visitors to Babylon marveled at the sight of laws carved in stone for all to observe. In their own territories, law was frequently the whim of local rulers or the memory of tribal elders. Here, in this great city between the rivers, justice had been granted permanent form, elevated from human caprice to divine command. As evening descended over the city, the stone pillars cast lengthy shadows across the courtyards where they stood. Within those shadows, the ordinary population of Babylon proceeded about their lives with a security unknown to previous generations. They existed under the protection of written law, in a society where justice wasn't merely an ideal, but a daily reality. The code represented more than legal innovation. It was a promise that the strong would not prey upon the weak, that agreements would be honored, that wrongs would be made right. In a world frequently governed by might alone, Hammurabi had created something precious, a kingdom where right made might, where the law was king. Temples and ziggurats. Above the bustling streets of ancient Babylon, enormous structures reached toward the heavens, resembling stone prayers. These were the ziggurats, stepped pyramids that functioned as bridges between earth and sky, between human worshippers and their gods. Each brick was positioned with reverence, each level constructed with the expectation of divine blessing. The most magnificent of these sacred towers was the Etemenanki, dedicated to Marduk, Babylon's patron god. Its name signified House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth, and it ascended in 7 terraces to a height that amazed all who witnessed it. Subsequent populations would remember it as the Tower of Babel, although by then its glory had diminished to legend. Constructing a ziggurat was a community effort that could extend across generations. Thousands of laborers toiled to produce the millions of bricks required for construction. Each brick was fabricated from the identical river mud that had nourished the initial settlements, mixed with straw and baked in the sun. The builders perceived their work as sacred, transforming the fundamental elements of their territory into something holy. The foundation was laid with particular care, frequently incorporating small tablets inscribed with prayers and offerings. These foundation deposits were intended to guarantee the god's favor and the building's stability. Laborers would chant as they laid each course of bricks, their voices ascending with the walls they constructed. The ziggurat's step design fulfilled both practical and spiritual purposes. Each level was smaller than the one beneath, generating a stable structure that could support tremendous weight. The terraces also represented the layers of heaven, with each level bringing worshippers closer to the realm of the gods. Access to the upper levels was carefully controlled. External staircases constructed into the structure's sides led from terrace to terrace. Only priests and other religious officials could ascend these sacred steps, carrying offerings and prayers to the temple at the summit. The common population could only gaze upward and imagine the divine presence dwelling above. The temple at the ziggurat's peak was the most sacred space in the city. Here the god was believed to dwell in physical form, represented by a golden statue that was tended like a living being. Priests would awaken the god each morning with hymns, offer meals throughout the day, and provide evening entertainment. The god wasn't just worshipped, but hosted, treated as an honored guest in their earthly residence. These temples were centers of learning as well as worship. Attached to each major temple was a school where young scribes learned to read and write. The curriculum incorporated not just religious texts, but also mathematics, astronomy, and literature. The priests were the keepers of knowledge, safeguarding the wisdom of ages in their libraries of clay tablets. The temple complex incorporated more than just the ziggurat itself. Surrounding the great tower were smaller buildings that housed the priests, workshops for crafting religious objects, and storerooms for the offerings brought by worshippers. These complexes functioned like small cities within the larger city, with their own economies and social structures. The economic power of the temples was tremendous. They possessed vast estates, worked by tenant farmers, received regular offerings from devoted worshippers, and engaged in trade and money lending. This wealth was utilized not just to maintain the temples, but to support the poor, fund public works, and sponsor festivals that brought joy to the entire community. The most significant of these festivals was the New Year celebration, which lasted for 11 days and culminated in a grand procession to the Temple of Marduk. The king himself participated in this ritual, symbolically receiving his authority from the god for another year. The entire city would be decorated with flowers and banners, while priests chanted the creation epic that recounted how Marduk had brought order to the world. Different gods possessed different temples throughout the city, each designed to reflect the deity's particular nature and powers. Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, possessed a temple decorated with images of lions and flowers. Nabu, the god of writing and wisdom, was honored in a temple lined with inscribed tablets. The diversity of these sacred spaces reflected the rich spiritual life of the Babylonian population. The construction techniques utilized in these temples were marvels of ancient engineering. The builders had learned to create strong mortar from bitumen, a natural tar that seeped from the ground in some areas. This waterproof binding helped the structures survive the seasonal floods and the test of time. Decorative elements transformed these functional buildings into works of artistic merit. Glazed bricks in brilliant blues and greens covered the walls, creating patterns that caught and reflected light. Golden fixtures gleamed in the torchlit interiors. Carved reliefs recounted stories of gods and heroes, turning the temple walls into illustrated books of mythology. The ziggurats also functioned as administrative centers for the communities they served. Records were maintained here of births, deaths, marriages, and land transactions. Legal disputes were frequently resolved in temple courts, with priests functioning as judges. The temple was genuinely the heart of the community, pumping life-giving services throughout the social body. At night, when the city grew quiet, the ziggurats remained active. Priests would ascend to the highest terraces to observe the stars, carefully recording the movements of planets and constellations. This astronomical knowledge was utilized to create calendars, predict eclipses, and provide guidance for agricultural and religious activities. The sight of these enormous structures dominated the landscape for miles around. Travelers approaching Babylon would see the ziggurats long before they reached the city walls, their peaks catching the first rays of dawn and the last light of sunset. These towers announced to the world that here was a city blessed by the gods, a place where heaven touched earth. The builders of these sacred structures believed they were creating more than buildings. They were constructing pathways to the divine. Each brick laid was an act of devotion. Each room completed was a gift to the gods. The ziggurat stood as proof of human aspiration, monuments to the desire to reach beyond the mundane world and touch something eternal. In the shadow of these great towers, the population of Babylon lived their daily lives with the constant reminder that they were part of something larger than themselves. The ziggurats connected them to their gods, to their history, and to their hopes for the future. These sacred mountains of brick and bitumen were the physical embodiment of faith itself. Hots of the riverlands. During the quiet hours before dawn, when the rivers whispered their ancient melodies, the gods of Babylon stirred in their heavenly realm. These divine beings shaped the world with their thoughts, their emotions, and their mighty deeds. To comprehend Babylon, one must first know the gods who watched over it from their throne rooms in the sky. At the head of this celestial court sat Marduk, the young god who had won supremacy through courage and wisdom. His story was recounted every new year in the sacred precincts of his great temple, a tale of cosmic battle and triumphant order. Yet Marduk's rise to power wasn't inevitable. It was earned through the most dramatic struggle in all mythology. Long before humans walked the earth, the universe was ruled by chaos. The primordial waters, personified as the dragon Tiamat, held dominion over all that existed. These weren't peaceful waters like the life-giving rivers, but turbulent seas of confusion and strife. Tiamat and her consort Apsu represented the wild forces that existed before order, before law, before the gentle rhythms that govern civilized life. The younger gods, born from these primordial waters, grew restless under the chaotic rule of their elders. They desired order, structure, and purpose. Their noise and energy disturbed Apsu's sleep, and in his anger, he decided to destroy his own children. Yet the wise god Ea discovered the plot and killed Apsu first, claiming his power and establishing his own dwelling place in the sweet waters below. Tiamat's rage at her consort's death knew no bounds. She gathered an army of monsters, dragons, serpents, and creatures of nightmare to wage war against the younger gods. At their head, she placed Kingu, her new champion, granting him the tablets of destiny that gave him power over fate itself. The young gods trembled before Tiamat's terrible host. One by one, the greatest among them attempted to face the dragon goddess and failed. Even Ea, who had defeated Apsu, could not stand against her fury. It seemed that chaos would triumph, and the universe would return to its original state of formless confusion. Then Marduk stepped forward. Young and strong, armed with bow and net, he offered to face Tiamat on one condition. If he won, he would become king of all the gods. The desperate deities agreed, and the cosmic battle commenced. The fight between Marduk and Tiamat shook the foundations of existence. She opened her jaws to swallow him, yet he caught her with his net and drove the winds into her throat. When she gasped for breath, he shot an arrow into her heart, slaying the great dragon of chaos. From her corpse, he created the world. Her body became the earth, her blood the rivers, her bones the mountains. Yet Marduk's work wasn't finished. From the blood of Kingu, Tiamat's defeated champion, he created humanity. These new beings would serve the gods, offering worship and sacrifice so that the divine beings could rest from their labors. Humans were thus born with a sacred purpose, to maintain the order that Marduk had established through his victory over chaos. This creation story was more than entertainment for the Babylonians. It explained their place in the universe and their relationship with the divine. Every spring flood reminded them of the primordial waters. Every harvest showed them the fruits of divine order. Their king ruled by Marduk's authority. Their laws reflected his justice. Their city was his earthly dwelling place. Yet Marduk wasn't alone in the Babylonian pantheon. His father, Ea, remained the god of wisdom and fresh water, dwelling in the Apsu below the earth. From his realm came the life-giving springs and the knowledge that allowed humans to thrive. Craftsmen and scribes especially honored Ea, seeing their skills as gifts from this wise deity. Enlil, the god of air and storms, controlled the winds that brought both blessing and destruction. His breath could fill the sails of merchant ships or unleash hurricanes that leveled cities. Farmers watched the sky carefully, reading the signs of Enlil's mood in the movement of clouds and the direction of breezes. Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, embodied the passionate forces that drove human life. As the evening star, she inspired lovers to embrace. As the morning star, she led warriors into battle. Her dual nature reflected the Babylonian understanding that creation and destruction were closely linked, that life required both love and conflict to flourish. The sun god Shamash brought light and justice to the world each day. His daily journey across the sky allowed him to see all human actions, making him the perfect judge of right and wrong. It was Shamash who had given Hammurabi the authority to create his famous code of laws, blessing the king's work with divine approval. Sin, the moon god, marked the passage of time with his changing phases. His silvery light guided travelers through dark nights and helped farmers know when to plant and harvest. The crescent moon became a symbol of divine protection, worn as an amulet by those who sought the god's favor. These major deities were supported by countless minor gods, each with their own sphere of influence. There were gods of individual cities, gods of particular crafts, gods who watched over households and families. The Babylonian world was thoroughly populated with divine beings, each playing their part in the cosmic order established by Marduk's victory. The gods weren't distant, abstract forces, but active participants in human affairs. They possessed emotions, preferences, and personalities. They could be pleased by proper worship or angered by neglect. They formed relationships with humans, sometimes blessing them with prosperity, sometimes testing them with hardship. This intimate relationship between gods and mortals meant that religious life was woven into every aspect of daily existence. Before eating, Babylonians would offer a portion to the gods. Before beginning work, they would seek divine blessing. Before making important decisions, they would consult priests who could interpret the will of the gods through various forms of divination. The gods of Babylon were thus more than objects of worship. They were cosmic forces that explained the workings of the universe and humanity's place within it. They provided meaning, purpose, and order to lives that might otherwise seem random and chaotic. In their stories, the Babylonians found not just entertainment, but truth about the nature of existence itself. As night descended over the great city, the population would look up at the stars and see the gods looking back. The same divine beings who had created the world continued to watch over it, ensuring that the order won by Marduk's triumph would endure. In this knowledge, the population of Babylon found comfort and slept peacefully under the protection of their celestial guardians, dreams and cuneiform. In the gentle light of dawn, scribes throughout Babylon would take their places at low tables, soft clay tablets waiting before them like blank pages, eager for stories. With reed styluses in hand, they would commence their daily work of capturing human thoughts in wedge-shaped marks, transforming spoken words into permanent records that would outlast the speakers themselves. The art of writing had commenced centuries earlier with simple pictures. A drawing of a bird signified bird. A sketch of water signified water. Yet as societies grew more complex, so did their need to record abstract ideas, numbers, and sounds. The Babylonians inherited the cuneiform system from their Sumerian predecessors and refined it into something marvelous, a tool that could capture not just objects, but thoughts, emotions, and dreams. Learning to write was a privilege reserved for the few. Young boys from wealthy families would enter the temple schools at age 7, commencing a decade-long journey into literacy. The schoolmaster, stern yet caring, would guide them through the hundreds of signs they needed to master. Each sign could represent a word, a syllable, or even an idea, and many signs possessed multiple meanings that changed depending on context. The students' days commenced before sunrise with the preparation of clay. They would knead river mud until it reached the perfect consistency, soft enough to take clear impressions, yet firm enough to hold its shape. Too wet, and the marks would blur. Too dry, and the stylus would scratch rather than press. Practice tablets filled with the same exercises generation after generation. Students would copy out lists of words, names of gods, types of birds, parts of the body. They memorized mathematical tables, practiced writing their own names, and copied moral sayings that taught them how to live good lives. A scribe who knows his craft will never lack for food, read one popular exercise, encouraging the young scholars in their difficult studies. The most talented students would eventually specialize. Some became temple scribes, recording religious ceremonies and maintaining the sacred calendar. Others joined the royal administration, drafting letters to foreign kings or keeping track of tax revenues. The most gifted might become literary scribes, creating new works of poetry and preserving the great epics of the past. These literary scribes were the guardians of humanity's first great stories. They copied and recopied the Epic of Gilgamesh, ensuring that the tale of the hero king and his quest for immortality would survive for future generations. They preserved creation myths, love songs, and wisdom literature, creating libraries that were treasuries of human thought and feeling. Yet cuneiform wasn't just for grand literature. The majority of tablets found by archaeologists contain the everyday records of ordinary individuals. Marriage contracts, business agreements, shopping lists, and personal letters reveal the intimate details of ancient life. A merchant writes to his wife, apologizing for his long absence on a trading journey. A mother sends instructions to her son about managing the family property. A student complains to his parents about the poor food at school. The mathematical tablets demonstrate the practical genius of Babylonian scholars. They developed a sophisticated number system based on 60, the same system we still utilize for measuring time and angles. Their astronomical observations were so accurate that they could predict eclipses centuries in advance. They solved complex algebraic problems and understood geometric principles that would not be rediscovered until much later in history. Medical tablets reveal a culture that combined rational observation with spiritual healing. Babylonian doctors recorded symptoms, treatments, and outcomes with scientific precision. They performed surgery, set broken bones, and created medicines from herbs and minerals. Yet they also recognized that illness could have spiritual causes, requiring prayers and rituals alongside physical treatment. Legal tablets preserve thousands of court cases, showing how Hammurabi's code was applied in practice. Property disputes, inheritance claims, and criminal trials are all documented in careful detail. These records reveal a sophisticated legal system that protected the rights of all citizens, from wealthy merchants to humble farmers. The process of creating a tablet was itself a form of meditation. The scribe would hold the stylus lightly, pressing it into the clay at various angles to create the wedge shapes that formed each sign. The rhythm of writing, press, lift, created a gentle cadence that helped focus the mind. In this quiet concentration, thoughts became permanent. Fleeting words transformed into lasting records. Personal letters reveal the emotional lives of ancient individuals. A father writes proudly of his son's achievements in school. A business partner expresses concern about a friend's illness. Lovers, separated by distance, exchange tender messages. These tablets remind us that despite the vast gulf of time, human feelings remain fundamentally unchanged. The tablets were fired in kilns to make them permanent, or sometimes simply dried in the sun if they were meant for temporary use. The most important documents were stored in jar libraries, carefully organized and catalogued. Some libraries contained thousands of tablets representing the accumulated knowledge of entire civilizations. Temple scribes maintained detailed records of religious festivals, noting which rituals were performed and which omens were observed. These tablets served as instruction manuals for future ceremonies, ensuring that traditions would be passed down correctly. They also recorded the dreams and visions of priests, believing that the gods communicated through these nighttime messages. Royal scribes faced the challenge of diplomatic correspondence. Letters between kings required careful attention to protocol and etiquette. The wrong phrase could cause offense. The right words could prevent war. These diplomatic tablets show a sophisticated international system where kingdoms from Egypt to Iran maintained regular communication. School tablets often contain practice exercises that seem surprisingly familiar. Students copied out multiplication tables, worked through word problems involving the measurement of fields, and, practiced writing formal letters. Teachers would correct mistakes and add encouraging comments, just as educators do today. The scribes saw themselves as servants of Nabu, the god of writing and wisdom. Before commencing work each day, they would offer a brief prayer for skill and accuracy. They understood that their work was sacred, preserving knowledge for future generations and enabling their civilization to function smoothly. As evening approached and the light grew too dim for detailed work, scribes would carefully store their tablets and clean their tools. The clay that remained unused would be re-wetted and saved for tomorrow's work. In this daily cycle of creation and preservation, the written word became humanity's most powerful tool for conquering time and distance. The legacy of these ancient scribes extends far beyond their own era. The tablets they produced in uniform fashion give us the most intricate glimpse into everyday existence within the planet's earliest urban society. Through the dedicated efforts of these workers, we gain access to the expressions of individuals who existed millennia in the past, conveying their aspirations, anxieties, visions, and revelations across time's enormous stretch. Within the silent chambers of the tablet repository, encircled by countless clay archives, Babylon's scribes fulfilled one of humanity's most vital responsibilities, converting spoken language into lasting record, guaranteeing that understanding and knowledge would persist far beyond the time when those who created them had become dust. Nebuchadnezzar, the visionary. Multiple centuries following Hammurabi's prosperous era, Babylon had experienced both triumph and loss. Imperial powers had emerged and collapsed, conquerors had arrived and departed, yet the mighty city persisted. Subsequently, in 605 before the Common Era, a youthful prince called Nebuchadnezzar claimed the throne and initiated the most splendid period in Babylon's extensive chronicle. From the initial moments of his kingship, Nebuchadnezzar conceived ideas on a magnitude that astonished even his own subjects. He observed the metropolis his forebears had constructed and imagined something more magnificent, a capital that would exceed every marvel the planet had witnessed. His visions weren't empty illusions, but rather plans for change that he chased with relentless determination. The new monarch inherited a realm, extending from the Mediterranean toward the Persian Gulf. However, he desired more than mere territory. He aimed to establish a civilization that would endure in memory eternally. A culture destined to shape the planet long after his military forces had faded from recollection. In chasing this ambition, he would transform into both architect and demolisher, originator and subjugator. Nebuchadnezzar's initial major undertaking was enlarging Babylon itself. He commanded the building of new fortifications that would render the metropolis unconquerable. These barriers ascended to extraordinary heights, sufficiently wide for 4-horse chariots to speed along their summits. The fortifications weren't merely military defenses, but declarations of authority, proclaiming to everyone who approached that they were stepping into the territory of the planet's mightiest monarch. The monarch's construction undertakings employed countless laborers from throughout his realm. Talented artisans arrived from subjugated territories, carrying their methods and customs to elevate Babylonian construction. The outcome was a blending of approaches that generated something completely novel, structures that merged the finest components of numerous cultures into a cohesive, artistic expression. Yet Nebuchadnezzar was beyond merely an architect. He was a warrior who enlarged his domain through a succession of masterful military operations. His forces advanced into Syria and Palestine, placing these prosperous regions beneath Babylonian dominion. The subjugation of Jerusalem in 586, before the Common Era, marked the apex of his martial achievement and the commencement of one of history's most notable population relocations. The blockade of Jerusalem continued 18 months, evidence of both the metropolis's resolve and Nebuchadnezzar's perseverance. When the fortifications ultimately crumbled, the monarch made a choice that would resonate throughout history. Instead of merely requiring payment, he commanded the metropolis's elite to be transferred to Babylon. This strategy of relocation wasn't created from harshness, but from intelligence. By transporting skilled individuals to his capital, he enhanced his own kingdom while stopping future uprisings. Among those transported to Babylon were religious leaders, scribes, artisans, and aristocrats, the precise individuals who could add most to the realm's wealth. They weren't handled as captives, but as important resources, granted roles in the administration and chances to exercise their crafts. This strategy of incorporation instead of domination became one of Nebuchadnezzar's finest breakthroughs. The monarch personally was captivated by these foreign cultures and their knowledge. He founded academies where Babylonian and foreign intellectuals could share concepts. The royal collection expanded to hold works in numerous languages, transforming Babylon into a hub of scholarship that drew pupils from throughout the recognized planet. Nebuchadnezzar's palace became famous for its grandeur. Foreign delegates reported in amazement about feasts presented on gold platters, about vegetation that appeared to hover in the atmosphere, about fortifications adorned with glazed bricks that sparkled like precious stones. The monarch grasped that remarkable exhibitions of prosperity and authority were themselves instruments in the competition of global politics. Still, for all his earthly achievement, Nebuchadnezzar stayed a profoundly devout individual. He committed vast resources to sacred undertakings, reconstructing temples and ordering new sculptures of the deities. He viewed himself as the deity's selected delegate on the planet, accountable for preserving the celestial arrangement that maintained the planet in equilibrium. The monarch's bond with the deity Marduk was especially strong. He reconstructed Marduk's magnificent temple, the Esagila, rendering it even more splendid than previously. The yearly New Year celebration, where the monarch renewed his legitimacy through sacred ceremony, became a spectacular observance that extended for days and attracted pilgrims from across the realm. Nebuchadnezzar also possessed a supernatural aspect that manifested itself through visions and revelations. Historical texts document multiple occasions where the monarch underwent prophetic visions that needed explanation by intelligent individuals. These visions frequently address the destiny of his kingdom and the fate of the planet, showing his profound worry for the inheritance he would abandon. His most renowned visions, documented in the biblical book of Daniel, portray a leader wrestling with matters of authority and death. The vision of the magnificent sculpture with feet of clay disclosed his recognition that even the strongest realms ultimately decay. The vision of the magnificent tree that was felled conveyed his anxieties about the fleeting character of worldly achievement. These spiritual worries didn't diminish the monarch's resolve to construct for perpetuity. He ordered works of artistic expression and construction designed to endure for millennia. The Ishtar Gate, with its spectacular glazed brick carvings of lions and mythical beasts, was generated to create wonder in guests for coming ages. Every element was arranged with future generations in consideration. The monarch's technical undertakings were similarly bold. He commanded the building of a sophisticated waterway network that delivered clean water to every section of the metropolis. Subterranean corridors linked significant structures, permitting protected movement during periods of blockade. The foundation he generated sustained a population greater than any metropolis had previously contained. Nebuchadnezzar's impact reached far past construction and technical work. He unified measurements and standards across his realm, enabling exchange and business. He created a messenger network that permitted quick communication throughout enormous distances. His governmental breakthroughs became patterns that subsequent realms would replicate and modify. The monarch governed for 43 years, exceeding most rulers of his period. Throughout this period, he changed Babylon from a regional authority into the marvel of the historical planet. His metropolis became a representation of human accomplishment, a location where the unattainable appeared routine and visions assumed physical shape. As he matured, Nebuchadnezzar devoted more time in reflection, frequently strolling through the vegetation he had generated. He would stop beside the artificial waterways and cascades, hearing the soft sound of moving water and possibly recalling the humble river that had produced the initial communities in this blessed territory. The monarch, who had envisioned constructing perpetuity, achieved beyond his most ambitious expectations. His identity would be recalled long following his realm's collapse. His metropolis would motivate tales for thousands of years, and his conception of Babylon as the planet's center would resonate through writings and prophecy until time's conclusion. Suspended vegetation at dusk. As the sun initiated its descent toward the western skyline, projecting extended shadows throughout Babylon's splendid streets, the most enigmatic of all the metropolis's marvels awakened. The suspended vegetation, if they genuinely existed, would have changed into a sanctuary of pigment and aroma in the soft evening illumination. Here, based on tradition, Queen Amytis discovered comfort for her longing, encircled by the verdant hills and moving waters of her faraway homeland. The narrative commences with affection and yearning. Nebuchadnezzar had wed Amytis, a royal daughter from the mountainous realm of Media, to confirm a political partnership between their two nations. She arrived to Babylon as a youthful bride, departing the cool forests and rushing waterways of her mountain homeland for the level, arid plains of Mesopotamia. Initially, the queen admired Babylon's marvels. The magnificent fortifications, the soaring ziggurats, and the vibrant Ishtar Gate captivated her with their magnificence. However, as the novelty diminished and longing emerged, she started to yearn for the terrains of her youth. The perpetual flatness of the river valley saddened her disposition, and she became wan and sorrowful. Nebuchadnezzar, committed to his spouse and aware of her sadness, developed an ambitious strategy. If he couldn't transport Amytis back to her mountains, he would transport the mountains to her. He would generate an artificial terrain that would recall her homeland, a verdant refuge that would ascend above the level rooftops of Babylon like an apparition from her visions. The technical obstacles were vast. To generate a multi-level vegetation area in a territory with no natural height variations demanded innovative thinking and expert construction. The monarch's designers conceived a succession of platforms sustained by enormous vaulted spaces, generating an artificial mountain that ascended in stages toward the atmosphere. The base level demanded exceptional strength to sustain the burden of earth, water, and developed trees multiple stories above ground. Dense fortifications of fired brick sealed with tar and lead panels formed spaces strong enough to support tons of soil and rock. These subterranean chambers also fulfilled practical functions, accommodating the intricate equipment needed to elevate water to the higher levels. Generating earth fertile enough to sustain abundant vegetation demanded importing soil from faraway regions. Merchant trains transported fertile loam from the mountains of Media, dark soil from river deltas, and thoughtfully composted natural material from across the realm. This valuable cargo was distributed thoughtfully on each platform, generating growing material deep enough for significant root networks. The water network was possibly the most brilliant aspect of the complete undertaking. A sequence of containers operated by groups of laborers or potentially by an early type of mechanical system elevated water from the Euphrates River to the uppermost platform. From there, it traveled down through passages carved into each level, generating waterways and cascades that fed the plants and supplied the sound of moving water that Amytis longed for from her homeland. Plants arrived from throughout the recognized planet to occupy these platforms. Cedar trees from Lebanon, fruit trees from Persia, blooming vines from faraway islands. Each variety selected for its attractiveness, aroma, or representative significance. The gardeners who maintained these foreign plants were experts transported from numerous territories, each knowledgeable in the maintenance of specific varieties. The lowest platform might have displayed date palms and pomegranate trees, generating a canopy of shade for the levels overhead. The middle platforms could have contained flower vegetation arranged in elaborate designs, with roses, jasmine, and other aromatic blooms occupying the atmosphere with scent. The uppermost level might have been designated for the most fragile plants and the queen's personal sanctuary. Pathways curved through the vegetation, permitting guests to ascend from level to level while encountering different environments and perspectives. Some routes were shaded by overhanging trees. Others revealed onto sunny clearings where foreign flowers bloomed in thoughtfully arranged beds. Stone seating supplied locations to rest and reflect on the attractiveness encircling them. The vegetation would have been most attractive in the evening when the severe desert sun mellowed into golden illumination. The atmosphere would cool and occupy with the evening melodies of birds that created their residences in this artificial sanctuary. Peacocks might have strolled the routes, their spectacular plumage adding touches of blue and emerald to the lush terrain. Water fulfilled a central function in the vegetation's attraction. Besides the practical requirement of watering, the sound and sight of moving water generated a sensory encounter that carried guests from the arid metropolis to an idealized natural realm. Fountains bubbled in concealed groves, waterways gurgled over ornamental stones, and small pools mirrored the atmosphere and encircling plants. The queen's structure, if it existed, would have been positioned at the vegetation's core, encircled by the most attractive and aromatic plants. Here, a Mitis could rest in the shade of imported trees, hearing to artificial waterways while observing out over a terrain that recalled her mountain homeland. The structure might have been constructed in the Persian approach, with floor coverings and cushions that further enhanced the impression of being in a different territory. Preserving such an elaborate vegetation area demanded constant focus. Groups of gardeners labored from sunrise to sunset, watering plants, trimming growth, replacing deceased specimens, and modifying the water movement to satisfy each plant's requirements. The expense of this preservation was vast, but Nebuchadnezzar regarded it a small cost for his spouse's contentment. The vegetation became renowned across the historical planet, drawing guests from faraway territories who arrived to witness this artificial marvel. Greek chroniclers documented them centuries subsequently, incorporating them among the 7 marvels of the historical planet. These descriptions, filtered through time and translation, are the sole proof we possess that the vegetation ever existed. Contemporary archaeologists have investigated for traces of these famous vegetation areas but have discovered no definitive proof. Some propose they may have been positioned outside Babylon proper, or that they might not have existed whatsoever. Possibly they were a creation of imaginative creativity, a representation of Babylon's prosperity and authority instead of an actual location. However, whether genuine or famous, the suspended vegetation captures something significant about Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. A kingdom where affection motivated grand expressions, where technical work supported attractiveness, and where the unattainable appeared attainable. In a territory that had discovered to make the desert flourish through watering and agriculture, the concept of suspended vegetation didn't appear fantastical, but merely bold. As dusk intensified into darkness, the vegetation would have assumed an almost supernatural quality. Oil lamps would brighten the roots, their wavering illumination generating dancing shadows among the leaves. The atmosphere would be dense with the scent of night-blooming flowers, and the sound of water would supply a soft lullaby for the queen's slumber. In her visions, possibly Amytis strolled not through artificial platforms, but through the genuine mountains of her youth. And possibly Nebuchadnezzar, inspecting his cherished vegetation before withdrawing, discovered contentment in recognizing that his affection had generated something attractive enough to motivate wonder for millennia to arrive. Ishtar's Gate, Babylon's core. Through the arid streets of historical Babylon, all routes directed to the same splendid destination. Ascending before guests like an apparition, from the domain of the deities themselves stood the Ishtar Gate, a masterwork of glazed brick and golden attractiveness that functioned as the ceremonial entrance to the planet's most powerful metropolis. This was where ground encountered heaven, where mortal magnificence contacted celestial splendor. The gate derived its identity from Ishtar, the goddess of affection and conflict, whose intricate character embodied the dual aspects of Babylon itself. Like the goddess, the metropolis could be both caring and intense, both inviting to allies and formidable to adversaries. The gate that carried her identity mirrored this duality in every thoughtfully crafted element. From a distance, the gate manifested as a fortification of spectacular blue, a pigment so intense it appeared to radiate with internal illumination. As travelers approached closer, the genuine artistry became evident. The blue background wasn't simple, but adorned with raised carvings of splendid beasts. Lions sacred to Ishtar, bulls representing the weather deity Adad, and mythical beasts symbolizing Marduk, guardian deity of Babylon. The generation of this marvel demanded skills that challenged historical craftsmanship to its boundaries. Expert potters shaped each brick manually, guaranteeing perfect alignment and appropriate proportion. The glazing process required exact control of kiln temperatures and chemical compositions. The intense blue pigment originated from powdered cobalt, a scarce and costly mineral that needed to be imported from faraway mines. Yellow and white glazes generated the stunning animal carvings that appeared to stride throughout the gate surface. Lions prowled in golden magnificence, their manes moving and muscles tense as if prepared to spring to existence. Bulls stood with heads elevated proudly, their horns capturing and mirroring illumination. Mythical beasts, fantastic creatures that existed solely in legend, merged features of serpent, eagle, and lion into beings of supernatural authority. The gate's construction commenced during Nebuchadnezzar's governance as component of his magnificent conception for the metropolis. Groups of talented artisans labored for years to finish the undertaking, each craftsman assuming pride in adding to something that would exceed their own brief existences. The labor was both devotional and practical, generating a structure that functioned the deities while defending the metropolis. The gate itself was genuinely double, an exterior and interior portal divided by a processional route that permitted elaborate ceremonies. This sacred pathway, paved with red and yellow bricks arranged in geometric designs, was sufficiently wide for magnificent processions involving countless participants. Throughout sacred celebrations, the complete route would be adorned with banners and flowers. Positioned beneath the gate's soaring arches, guests would experience dwarfed by its magnitude and awed by its attractiveness. The structure ascended multiple stories high, its fortifications dense enough to accommodate guard chambers and storage spaces. Arrow openings and defensive positions were skillfully incorporated into the ornamental scheme, rendering the gate both attractive and militarily practical. The internal surfaces of the gate were as thoughtfully adorned as the exterior fortifications. Polished stone lined the corridors, carved with cuneiform inscriptions, praising the deities and glorifying Nebuchadnezzar's accomplishments. The monarch desired everyone who traversed through his gate to comprehend the authority and devotion of Babylon's ruler. Throughout the New Year celebration, the gate became the central point of Babylon's most significant sacred observance. The procession route that directed through the gate would occupy with religious leaders, aristocrats, and common individuals, all participating in the renewal ceremony that verified Marduk's supremacy and the monarch's celestial legitimacy. The spectacularly pigmented fortifications supplied a stunning backdrop for these sacred ceremonies. The sound properties of the gate were as thoughtfully arranged as its visual impact. The arched corridors amplified sounds so that hymns sung within would resonate with haunting attractiveness. The clip-clop of horses, hooves, the rumble of ceremonial chariots, and the chants of religious leaders would resonate impressively, adding an auditory dimension to the gate's magnificence. Foreign delegates approaching Babylon would witness the gate from miles distant, its blue fortifications standing out against the brown terrain like a precious stone set in earthen gold. This was deliberate. Nebuchadnezzar desired guests to comprehend Babylon's authority long before they arrived at the metropolis proper. The gate was a declaration in glazed brick, proclaiming that they were stepping into a domain unlike any other. The representative program of the gate's adornment conveyed vital, sacred, and political messages. the lions of Ishtar, recalled viewers of the goddess's defensive authority over the metropolis. The bulls of Adad invoked the storm deity's strength in conflict. The mythical beasts of Marduk proclaimed the supreme deity's governance over both celestial and earthly domains. Together, these representations generated a comprehensive declaration of Babylon's celestial defense. Merchants and traders who formed the vitality of Babylon's economy would traverse through the gate daily with their merchant trains of goods. The location never diminished its capacity to motivate. These practical individuals focused on profits and exchange routes would stop in their discussions to admire at the craftsmanship encircling them. The gate recalled everyone that Babylon was beyond merely a commercial hub. It was a sacred metropolis, blessed by the deities. The preservation of the gate demanded constant focus. Groups of craftsmen were permanently employed to restore damaged glazing, cleanse the surfaces, and refresh ornamental components worn by weather and time. This ongoing maintenance was regarded a sacred obligation as well as a practical requirement. Maintaining the gate attractive was a form of devotion. Throughout blockade conflict, the gate functioned as beyond merely a ornamental entrance. Its enormous fortifications and defensive positions rendered it a formidable obstacle for any military attempting to capture the metropolis. Archers could shower arrows down on attackers from concealed positions, while the narrow corridors limited the quantity of adversaries who could assault the defenses simultaneously. The gate's impact reached far past its military and sacred functions. It became a representation of Babylon itself, replicated in artistic expression and writings across the historical planet. Foreign artists attempted to capture its attractiveness in their own works, though none could genuinely convey the overwhelming impact of witnessing the original structure in individual. At different periods of day, the gate exhibited different moods. Dawn illumination would set the blue glazing ablaze with mirrored fire. Midday sun would make the pigments appear to vibrate with intensity. Evening would mellow the hues into soft pastels, while darkness would change the gate into an enigmatic presence brightened by torches and oil lamps. The gate also functioned practical governmental functions. Revenue collectors preserved offices within its spaces. Customs officials examined goods traversing through, and guards verified the credentials of guests seeking entrance to the metropolis. The gate was thus a functioning component of Babylon's administrative apparatus as well as an artistic masterwork. Children developing in Babylon would engage in the gate's shadow, assuming its magnificence for granted in the manner children do. Solely when they traveled to other metropolises did they recognize how exceptional their hometown genuinely was. The gate had become so much a component of their realm that they couldn't imagine a metropolis entrance without glazed brick animals and soaring blue fortifications. As centuries elapsed and Babylon's authority diminished, the gate stayed as evidence to the metropolis's former triumph. Even when political control transferred to other authorities, guests continued to admire at this surviving marvel of historical construction. The gate had exceeded its original function to become something perpetual, a work of artistic expression that communicated throughout cultures and ages about human aspiration and celestial inspiration. In the silent moments between the activity of daily movement, when the magnificent plaza before the gate stood vacant, except for the interaction of illumination and shadow on blue brick, the structure appeared to breathe with the accumulated prayers and visions of all who had traversed beneath its arches. Here at Babylon's core, the gate stood as guardian and representation, defending not merely a metropolis, but the precise concept of civilization itself. The displacement of the selected. The year was 597 before the Common Era. Jerusalem's fortifications gleamed golden in the morning sun, yet shadows accumulated on the skyline. King Nebuchadnezzar's military forces moved like a gradual tide throughout the desert, their bronze spears capturing illumination, their footsteps elevating dust that settled on olive groves and wheat fields. In the palace of Judah, King Jehoiachin sat upon his throne, scarcely 18 years old. His advisors whispered pressing words about payment and surrender. The youthful monarch's hands trembled as he held the royal seal. Outside, children engaged in the courtyards, unaware that their realm was about to alter forever. The blockade arrived gently at first. Babylonian soldiers encircled the metropolis like a patient embrace. They didn't storm the gates or ignite fires. They merely waited. Days transformed to weeks. Food became scarce. Water became valuable. The individuals of Jerusalem started to comprehend that their period had arrived. When the gates ultimately opened, it was not with violence, but with resignation. King Jehoiakim walked out to encounter his fate, his purple robes dragging in the dust. Nebuchadnezzar received him with the courtesy appropriate to a fallen ruler. No restraints were positioned upon the youthful monarch's wrists. No severe words were communicated. The subjugation of Jerusalem was performed like a formal dance. Each stage measured and exact. The selection commenced gradually. Babylonian scribes moved through the metropolis with clay tablets documenting identities. They pursued the talented ones first. Craftsmen who could labor gold and silver, scribes who could read and compose, musicians who could perform the lyre and harp. These were the treasures Babylon craved most. Families assembled in the temple courtyard, holding each other close. Mothers sang lullabies to soothe their children. Fathers communicated quietly of the journey ahead. The elderly offered blessings and prayers. There was weeping, but it was soft weeping, like rain descending on leaves. 10,000 souls were selected for the march. They packed what they could transport: scrolls of scripture wrapped in linen, family heirlooms tucked into satchels. Children clutched wooden toys and clay dolls. The procession formed like a river, moving gradually through Jerusalem's streets, one final period. The journey to Babylon extended throughout 900 miles of desert and plain. Dust clouds marked their passage. At darkness, campfires dotted the terrain like fallen stars. Guards walked among the displaced, but they weren't harsh. Water was distributed. Food was allocated. The sick were transported on carts. Ezekiel the prophet walked among his individuals, communicating words of comfort. His voice carried throughout the camp each evening, telling narratives of God's faithfulness. Children assembled around him, their eyes wide with wonder. Adults discovered solace in his soft words. The march became a pilgrimage, each stage a prayer for the destiny. Rivers marked their advancement. The Jordan was abandoned. The Euphrates welcomed them into Mesopotamia. As they crossed that historical waterway, numerous wept. They were departing the territory of their fathers, stepping into a domain of strange deities and foreign tongues. Babylon's fortifications manifested on the skyline like a golden illusion. Towers arrived toward heaven, gates gleamed with blue glazed brick. Vegetation spilled over platforms in cascades of emerald. The displaced had never witnessed such splendor. Their own Jerusalem, attractive as it was, appeared small and humble by comparison. The metropolis gates opened to receive them. Babylonian citizens lined the streets, curious but not hostile. Children pointed at the foreign dress. Merchants eyed the newcomers with interest. Officials guided the procession toward the quarters prepared for them. Communities were created along the waterways. Residences were constructed with brick and timber. Vegetation areas were planted with familiar herbs and vegetables. The displaced weren't imprisoned, but settled. They could wed, raise families, and chase their trades. Babylon offered them a new residence, not a prison. By the waters of Babylon, the waterways of Babylon moved like liquid silver through the metropolis. Willow trees drooped their branches into the water, generating shaded alcoves where the displaced could rest and recall. It was beneath these trees that the most attractive sorrow in all of Scripture was created. By the waters of Babylon, there we rested and wept when we recalled Zion. The words originated from deep in the core, from a location where longing resided like a constant ache. The psalmist who composed these words recognized the specific grief of distance. The manna memory could render the core both occupied and vacant at once. Harps suspended silent on the willow branches. These instruments, once utilized to praise God in Jerusalem's temple, now functioned as representations of silence. The displaced had been requested to perform the melodies of Zion for their captors' entertainment. However, how could they perform the Lord's melody in a foreign territory? Their music was prayer, not performance. The request had originated from Babylonian aristocrats who had learned of Hebrew poetry. They desired to hear the melodies that had resonated through Jerusalem's courts. Possibly they intended no harm. Possibly they were merely curious about the culture of their new residents. However, to the displaced, the request appeared like ridicule. Children created in Babylon would develop hearing these narratives. They would discover of Jerusalem from their parents' memories, transmitted down like valuable heirlooms. The metropolis would become legendary to them, a golden conception of residence they had never witnessed. Still, in their cause, it would stay the most genuine location on the planet. The waterways transported beyond water. They transported whispered prayers and midnight tears. They transported the visions of elderly individuals who communicated of Mount Zion in their slumber. They transported the expectations of youthful mothers who instructed their babies Hebrew words. Anxious, the language might be neglected. Markets buzzed with activity, yet the displaced moved through them like phantoms. They purchased and sold, labored and earned, yet their thoughts stayed elsewhere. Babylon's splendor encircled them. Still they dwelt in a Jerusalem of the mind, strolling its familiar streets in memory. Evening transported the most difficult hours. When labor was finished and families assembled, the silence expanded dense. Discussions transformed to residence. Someone would reference the temple courts, the morning sacrifice, the celebrations they had observed. Tears would move like the waterway water, steady and perpetual. Women drew water from the river, their clay jars mirroring the atmosphere. As they labored, they sang quietly to themselves. Not the melodies of Zion, which were too sacred for common usage, but simple tunes that recalled them of residence. Lullabies their mothers had sung, laboring melodies from harvest period, fragments of attractiveness preserved in memory. The children modified first, as children do. They discovered Babylonian customs and Aramaic words. They engaged with local children and discovered new games. However, their parents observed with mixed feelings. Each indication of modification was both blessing and loss. Their children were surviving, yet they were also altering. Scribes labored thoughtfully to preserve their heritage. They replicated the historical texts word by word, letter by letter. The law of Moses was transcribed onto clean tablets. The Psalms were composed in thoughtful script. The prophecies were preserved like seeds, waiting for the appropriate season to flourish. Darkness transported strange sounds. Babylonian religious leaders chanted in the distance. Temple bells rang at unfamiliar hours. The calls of foreign birds resonated through the darkness. The displaced rested on their beds, hearing to a realm that wasn't their own, envisioning sounds they might never hear again. Some discovered comfort in small ceremonies. They faced west when they prayed, toward the direction of residence. They maintained the Sabbath quietly, marking time as their ancestors had. They told narratives of Abraham and Moses, David and Solomon. These practices became anchors in the shifting tide of displacement. The psalmist's words captured it all. The resting by the waters, the weeping at the memory of Zion, the harps suspended up in silence, the unattainable request to perform the Lord's melody in a foreign territory. The oath never to neglect Jerusalem, even if it indicated their right hand would diminish its skill, and their tongue would adhere to the roof of their mouth. In these verses, the complete encounter of displacement discovered its expression. The pain of separation, the refusal to devalue what was sacred, the intense loyalty to a faraway residence, the resolve to recall, no matter how much time elapsed or how far they traveled. Daniel's initial darkness. The palace of Nebuchadnezzar gleamed like a precious stone in the diminishing illumination. Youthful Daniel stood in the courtyard, his travel-stained robes a stark contrast to the polished marble beneath his feet. Fountains whispered their perpetual melodies. Peacocks strolled through vegetation areas where flowers bloomed in unattainable pigments. He was possibly 14 years old, selected from among the displaced aristocrats for his quick mind and unblemished character. The Babylonian officials had investigated through the Hebrew captives, pursuing youthful individuals who could be trained in the monarch's service. Daniel's knowledge had marked him from the commencement. The other Hebrew youths assembled around him. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah shared his wonder at the palace's magnificence. They had developed in Jerusalem's courts, yet nothing had prepared them for Babylon's splendor. Gold leaf covered every surface. Valuable stones were set into the fortifications like stars. Chief Ashpenaz welcomed them with unexpected gentleness. His expression was soft, his manner gentle. He explained their new existences would be comfortable. They would consume from the monarch's table, drink the monarch's wine, and discover the knowledge of the Chaldeans. In 3 years, they would stand before Nebuchadnezzar personally. New identities were granted to replace the old ones. Daniel became Belteshazzar, an identity that honored Babylon's deity, Bel. His companions received similar honors. The Babylonians grasped that altering identities could alter loyalties. They pursued to remake these Hebrew youths into Babylonian individuals. The initial test arrived at dinner. Servants transported golden platters occupied with rich foods, meat that had been offered to idols, wine that had been blessed by foreign religious leaders. The feast was magnificent, yet Daniel's core became troubled. To consume would be to compromise. To refuse might indicate death. He approached Ashpenaz with thoughtful words. Could they possibly consume vegetables instead? Drink water instead of wine? The request was made with such courtesy that the chief eunuch discovered himself considering it. Daniel's knowledge resided not in confrontation, but in discovering gentle routes through difficult terrain. The test was agreed upon. For 10 days, Daniel and his companions would consume solely vegetables and drink solely water. The other pupils would feast on the monarch's delicacies. At the conclusion, their health would be compared. It was a dangerous gamble, yet Daniel trusted in something greater than palace food. Their quarters were luxurious beyond imagining. Silk curtains suspended from cedar beams, floor coverings from faraway territories covered the floors. Each youthful individual possessed servants to attend his requirements. Still, Daniel discovered peace, not in these comforts, but in the silent moments when he could pray to the God of his fathers. The collection amazed him most. Scrolls covered every fortification, holding the knowledge of ages, mathematics and astronomy, medicine and law, the accumulated understanding of the greatest realm on the planet. Daniel approached these texts with the hunger of an intellectual, drinking in learning like an individual dying of thirst. His instructors were the most knowledgeable individuals in Babylon. They communicated of star charts and vision interpretation. They instructed the mysteries of divination and the secrets of the Magi. Daniel discovered it all, yet he never neglected the source of genuine knowledge. His God was greater than all the learning of individuals. The 10 days elapsed quickly. When the test concluded, Daniel and his companions stood before their examiner. Their skin radiated with health. Their eyes were bright and clear. They had developed stronger on vegetables and water than their companions had on royal delicacies. The chief eunuch marveled at what he witnessed. Word of the Hebrew youths distributed through the palace. They weren't solely healthy, but remarkably intelligent. In every subject they studied, they excelled beyond their peers. Their instructors whispered that they appeared to possess celestial assistance. Understanding arrived to them as easily as breathing. Daniel discovered he possessed a special gift. Visions that puzzled the knowledgeable individuals made perfect sense to him. Revelations that appeared like riddles disclosed their secrets at his contact. God had granted him the key to mysteries that had baffled intellectuals for ages. The other pupils observed him with mixed emotions. Some were jealous of his abilities. Others were drawn to his gentle knowledge. Daniel never boasted of his gifts or claimed credit for his achievement. He communicated always of the God who had blessed him, the same God who had observed over his individuals in displacement. At darkness, when the palace became silent, Daniel would stand at his window and observe toward the west. Somewhere beyond the skyline resided Jerusalem, the metropolis of his birth. His body dwelt in Babylon, yet his core stayed with his individuals. He prayed for them each evening, requesting God to recall his covenant and transport them residence. The 3 years of training extended ahead like an extended journey. Daniel recognized he was being prepared for something greater than he could imagine. The God who had delivered him from compromise in small things would utilize him for larger functions. He was content to wait, to discover, and to function faithfully in whatever function he was granted. The monarch's neglected vision. Slumber eluded King Nebuchadnezzar like a timid bird that would not be captured. He tossed upon his golden bed, his mind churning with images he couldn't quite grasp. In the depths of darkness, a revelation had arrived to him, intense and formidable. However, when dawn broke over Babylon's towers, the vision had vanished like mist. The monarch ascended with the sun, his core heavy with unease. Something significant had visited him in slumber, something that required comprehension. He could experience its burden pressing upon his spirit, yet its significance stayed concealed. The harder he attempted to recall, the more elusive it became. Royal summons went out throughout the metropolis. Every knowledgeable individual in Babylon was commanded to manifest before the throne. Magicians and astrologers hurried through the streets, their robes billowing behind them. Soothsayers and enchanters assembled in the palace courtyard, whispering among themselves about the monarch's enigmatic request. They assembled in the magnificent hall, an impressive gathering of learned individuals. Beards white with age, eyes bright with accumulated knowledge. These were the intellectuals who had functioned the crown for decades, interpreting visions and reading omens. They had never failed to satisfy a royal request. Nebuchadnezzar entered like a storm cloud, his presence occupying the vast chamber. Guards flanked him, their spears gleaming in the morning illumination. The monarch's face carried the marks of a sleepless darkness. His eyes held a desperate intensity that made the knowledgeable individuals shift uncomfortably. "I have envisioned a vision," the monarch proclaimed, his expression resonating off marble fortifications. "And my spirit is troubled to comprehend the vision." The assembled intellectuals nodded knowingly. Vision interpretation was their specialty. They had studied the historical texts, memorized the traditional significances. They were prepared to function. However, then arrived the monarch's shocking requirement. "Tell me the vision and its interpretation." The knowledgeable individuals exchanged glances of confusion. Normally, the visionary would recount his revelation, and they would explain its significance. However, Nebuchadnezzar was requesting them to disclose both the vision and its interpretation. It was unattainable. The chief magician advanced forward, his expression thoughtfully respectful. "O monarch, exist forever. Tell your servants the vision, and we will display the interpretation." It was a reasonable request. The manner these things had always been performed. However, the monarch's response struck them like thunder. "The thing is departed from me," Nebuchadnezzar declared. "If you will not make recognized to me the vision and its interpretation, you shall be severed in pieces, and your residences shall be made a dunghill." The threat suspended in the atmosphere like incense, heavy and ominous. The monarch's neglecting had become their death sentence. Terror gripped the assembled intellectuals. They had constructed their careers on interpreting visions, yet they had never been requested to read the monarch's mind. They protested that no monarch had ever made such a request. They argued that solely the deities could disclose such secrets. However, Nebuchadnezzar stayed unmoved. "I recognize that you would gain time," the monarch accused, "because you witness the thing is departed from me. However, if you will not make recognize to me the vision, there is but one decree for you." His patience was exhausted. If his knowledgeable individuals couldn't assist him, what good were they? The magicians made one final plea. "There is not an individual upon the planet who can display the monarch's matter," they declared. "Therefore there is no monarch, lord or ruler who has requested such things of any magician or astrologer or Chaldean." Their words rang with desperate truth, yet truth wouldn't save them. Captain Arioch received the monarch's command with heavy core. The decree was clear. All the knowledgeable individuals of Babylon were to be executed. He commenced gathering soldiers, preparing for the grim task ahead. The greatest minds in the realm would perish because they couldn't read thoughts. Word of the death sentence distributed through the metropolis like wildfire. Families of the condemned assembled in the streets, weeping and pleading. The knowledgeable individuals themselves rested in stunned silence, unable to comprehend their fate. They had functioned faithfully for years, yet their understanding had proven worthless when it mattered most. Among those marked for death was youthful Daniel. He had finished his training and was now counted among the monarch's knowledgeable individuals. When Captain Arioch arrived to arrest him, Daniel received the news with remarkable calm. He requested for time to pursue the answer the monarch required. That darkness, Daniel assembled his 3 companions in pressing prayer. They knelt together in the silence of their chambers, crying out to the God of heaven for mercy. They requested for revelation, for the secret that would preserve not solely their existences, but the existences of all Babylon intellectuals. Their prayers ascended like incense in the darkness. As dawn approached, the answer arrived. In a darkness revelation, God disclosed to Daniel both the monarch's neglected vision and its significance. The youthful Hebrew ascended from his knees with joy, his core occupied with gratitude. The God of Israel had once again displayed his authority in the core of a pagan realm, the intense furnace. The golden image stood 90 feet tall on the plain of Dura, its surface gleaming like captured sunlight. King Nebuchadnezzar had commanded its construction following his troubling vision, possibly hoping to control his own destiny through this magnificent exhibition of authority. The sculpture dominated the terrain, visible from miles distant. Musicians assembled at its base, their instruments polished and prepared. Harps and lyres captured the morning breeze. Drums waited in patient silence. Flutes and pipes rested thoughtfully arranged on silk cushions. When the signal arrived, their music would ring throughout the plain, calling all individuals to devotion. The royal decree had departed to every corner of the realm. All officials, magnificent and small, were commanded to attend the dedication ceremony. Princes and governors traveled from faraway provinces. Captains and judges departed their courts. Treasurers and counselors abandoned their obligations. Babylon's authority was on exhibition. The crowd assembled like a human sea on the plain. Countless upon countless of individuals distributed throughout the level ground, their vibrant robes generating a living tapestry. Children clung to their parents' hands. Elderly officials discovered shade where they could. The anticipation was dense as honey in the atmosphere. Herald expressions rang out throughout the multitude, their words resonating from individual to individual. "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall descend down and devotion the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has established." The penalty for disobedience was proclaimed with equal clarity. Anyone who refused to bow would be projected immediately into a burning, intense furnace. The threat wasn't idle. A magnificent furnace had been prepared nearby, its flames already leaping toward the atmosphere. The heat could be experienced even at a distance. Among the crowd stood 3 youthful individuals whose identities had been altered, yet whose cores stayed unchanged. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had ascended high in Babylon's administration, yet their loyalty to the God of Israel had never wavered. They faced the golden image with calm resolve. The moment of testing arrived, with the initial note of music. The horns sounded its deep, resonant call. Flutes joined in with their sweet melody. Harps added their silver expressions to the melody. The symphony swelled throughout the plain like a tide, attractive and formidable at once. As one, the vast multitude descended to their knees, faces pressed against the ground, hands extended toward the golden sculpture. The plain became a floor covering of prostrate bodies, all bowing before Nebuchadnezzar's generation. The monarch observed from his structure, contentment warming his core. However, three figures stayed standing. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood straight as cedars while the realm around them bowed. Their silent defiance was visible from the royal platform. Babylonian officials pointed them out to the monarch, their expressions pressing with accusation. "O Nebuchadnezzar, exist forever." The accusers declared, "You have made a decree that everyone who hears the music shall descend down and devotion the golden image. And whoever doesn't descend down and devotion shall be projected into the midst of a burning, intense furnace." Their words dripped with righteous indignation. The monarch's face darkened like a storm cloud. These three individuals had been his trusted servants, promoted to high positions in his administration. He had handled them with favor and respect. Now they dared to defy his direct command in front of the complete realm. The intensity of his fury exceeded even the blazing heat of the furnace that had been stoked and waiting. "Is this the truth, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do you truly refuse to serve my gods or bow before the golden statue I have erected?" The monarch's words traveled across the open field, broadcasting the charge for all to hear. He presented them with one last opportunity to reconsider what they had chosen. The trio stood side by side, their expressions serene in spite of the deadly threat they faced. Their decision had been settled long before, during those private hours spent in prayer and contemplation of Scripture. The God they worshipped surpassed any earthly monarch in greatness, transcended any threat in power. They could not bend their knees to something fashioned by mortal hands. "O Nebuchadnezzar," Shadrach responded, his tone unwavering and strong, "we see no necessity to defend ourselves to you regarding this issue. Should that be your concern," he continued, "the God we worship has the ability to rescue us from the fiery furnace that burns, and he will save us from your authority, O king." Their conviction resonated like the clear ring of a bronze bell. "However, even if he does not," Meshach added, "understand this, O king. We will not worship your deities, and we will not bow down before the golden image you have constructed." These declarations determined their destiny. They would place their complete trust in their God, regardless of whether he intervened to save them or allowed them to perish. Nebuchadnezzar's rage erupted beyond all measure or control. He ordered the furnace heated to 7 times its normal temperature. The flames roared upward toward the sky, visible to everyone assembled. The heat grew so overwhelming that the soldiers who tied up the 3 men perished from its sheer force. Yet, peering through the furnace opening, the king's wrath transformed into astonishment. 4 shapes moved within the inferno, not the 3 he had condemned. The 4th figure resembled a divine being, radiating with heavenly luminescence. The fire held no dominion over them whatsoever. Not one strand of hair was burned, not a single piece of clothing showed damage. They strolled through the flames as casually as if walking through a pleasant garden on a spring afternoon. The towering tree that reached toward the heavens. Peace had descended upon Babylon like a soft covering. The empire extended from where the sun rose to where it set, its boundaries protected and its population satisfied. King Nebuchadnezzar strolled through the palace gardens, taking in the abundance that encompassed him on every side. His chest filled with pride over everything his hands had accomplished. The suspended gardens fell away in levels of magnificent beauty, their waters cascading in streams that gleamed like silver. Flowers from distant lands bloomed in colors that seemed impossible in nature. Trees heavy, with fruit bent under the weight of their sweet offerings. Birds called from every limb, their voices merging into a harmonious chorus of satisfaction. The king stopped to inhale the fragrance of jasmine blossoms and roses in full bloom. It was in this time of victory that sleep delivered another prophetic vision to him. Nebuchadnezzar reclined upon his bed, crafted from gold and ivory, his physical form resting, yet his consciousness remained open to messages from the divine realm. Within the world of dreams, God communicated with both kings and common people, employing the vocabulary of symbols and imagery. The vision started with a tree, not just any ordinary tree, but one growing with power beyond natural laws. Its trunk expanded with every moment that passed. Its limbs extended outward like arms, offering welcome to all. Its foliage whispered with vitality, becoming richer and fuller in green abundance. The tree climbed upward toward the very dwelling place of heaven, its uppermost branches touching the clouds themselves. From his elevated vantage point, the king observed the tree's spectacular growth. Its shade spread across the entire earth below. Creatures of the wilderness discovered refuge under its spreading branches. Birds constructed nests among its boughs. Every living being found nourishment from the fruit it produced. The tree had transformed into the axis of all creation, providing sustenance to every form of life. Then a voice thundered from the celestial realm, awesome in its power and authority. A holy observer descended from the heavenly domain, his very presence causing the atmosphere itself to vibrate with energy. His declarations echoed like crashes of thunder across the landscape of the dream. Cut down the tree and sever its branches, strip away its leaves and disperse its fruit. The divine instruction continued with unrelenting exactness. Let the animals flee from beneath it, and the birds abandon its branches. Nevertheless, leave behind the stump with its roots in the ground, bound with bands of iron and bronze in the soft grass of the field, and let it be drenched with the dew from heaven, and let his share be with the wild animals in the grass covering the earth. The watcher's tone became even more grave and solemn. Let his mind be altered from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of a beast, and let 7 periods of time pass over him. This decision comes by decree of the watchers, and the verdict by the word of the holy ones, so that those who are living may understand that the Most High has supreme authority in the kingdoms of humanity. Nebuchadnezzar jolted awake, his heart hammering in his chest like a war drum. The vision clung to his consciousness with frightening precision and clarity. Unlike the previous dream he'd experienced, this one stayed vivid in every single detail. The tree, the watcher, the divine verdict, all of it seared into his memory like marks burned by fire. Dread crept into the king's heart like an icy wind blowing through empty chambers. He grasped enough about communication from the divine to recognize that this vision carried a deeply personal message for him. The tree reaching toward the sky, the one sheltering the entire world. Could this represent his own empire, his own life? The thought flooded him with terror and apprehension. Once more, the learned men of Babylon received a summons to appear before the throne. They arrived with expressions full of confidence, assured of their capabilities and knowledge. The king's earlier dream had been successfully decoded by the young Hebrew named Daniel. Certainly, this new vision would prove equally solvable. But after Nebuchadnezzar recounted every detail of his dream, silence fell across the gathering like a heavy burial cloth. The wise men cast anxious glances at one another. They comprehended the symbolism sufficiently to recognize that this was no typical royal vision. This was a dream of coming judgment, and nobody wished to be the messenger delivering such devastating news. Daniel arrived at the royal palace, carrying his characteristic quiet dignity. The king greeted him with particular honor, remembering how the young man had served him previously. "Belteshazzar," The king addressed him, using Daniel's name given in Babylon. "I am aware that the spirit of the holy gods dwells within you, and no mystery proves too difficult for you. Listen to the visions from my dream that I witnessed, and provide its interpretation." As Daniel absorbed the dream's details, his countenance grew deeply troubled. For an entire hour, he remained in contemplative silence, his thoughts grappling with the vision's significance. The king watched him with increasing worry, recognizing the gravity of what was being unveiled before them. At last, Daniel spoke, his voice weighted with genuine compassion. "My lord, may the dream apply to those who hate you, and may its interpretation fall upon your adversaries." He wished desperately that the prophecy could descend upon Babylon's enemies instead of the king himself, but divine truth could not be modified by human preference or desire. The interpretation unfurled like a scroll, revealing destiny. The magnificent tree was, without question, Nebuchadnezzar himself. His kingdom had expanded until it reached the heavens above. His rule stretched to the farthest ends of the earth. His authority provided shelter to nations and gave food to peoples across the known world. However, pride had taken deep root within his heart, and judgment would inevitably follow. The cutting down of the tree signified that the king would lose both his sanity and his throne. He would be expelled from human society to live among the beasts roaming the fields. His mind would transform into the mind of an animal. 7 years would elapse in this terrible condition until he finally learned that the Most High God holds ultimate rule over all earthly kingdoms and their rulers. Yet mercy was woven throughout the message of coming judgment. The stump would be left behind, secured with iron and bronze. Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom would be preserved, remaining in place and waiting for his eventual restoration. When he finally acknowledged God's complete sovereignty, both his sanity and his throne would be given back to him. Daniel's voice carried both deep sorrow and cautious hope as he brought his interpretation to a close. "Therefore, O king, may my advice be acceptable to you. Turn away from your sins by practicing righteousness, and from your iniquities by demonstrating mercy toward the poor. Perhaps this will result in an extension of your peace and prosperity." The descent into madness in the garden. 12 months turned like pages in an ancient book. The seasons cycled from spring through summer to autumn to winter and returned to spring once more. King Nebuchadnezzar continued performing his royal responsibilities, but Daniel's warning echoed constantly in the halls of his memory. The dream of the great tree stayed vivid, a persistent reminder of the divine warning he had received. The king found himself pausing frequently during his walks through the garden, examining the trees growing there. Everyone seemed to whisper reminders of the vision. The cedar of Lebanon, spreading its branches wide, the date palm crowned with fronds, the fig tree bending under the weight of its fruit, all brought to mind the tree from his dream, the one heaven's command had felled. Yet, as the months continued their progression, the warning appeared to diminish in urgency. The kingdom flourished under his leadership. Tribute poured in from lands far away. Construction projects were transforming Babylon into a marvel of the world. The king's pride, which the dream had shaken, started to reassert itself like a weed thriving in rich soil. The rooftop garden of the palace became his preferred place of retreat. Here, elevated high above the city below, he could survey everything his hands had constructed. The hanging gardens fell away beneath him in terraced splendor. The wide boulevards extended toward the distant horizon. The temples and towers proclaimed his achievements to the entire world. It presented a scene calculated to fill any person's heart with deep satisfaction. On that fateful day, the sun blazed with exceptional brightness. A soft breeze moved through the leaves of the garden trees. The king positioned himself at the parapet, gazing out across his domain with eyes that perceived only his personal accomplishments. The moment had arrived when pride would reach its fatal bloom. "Is this not great Babylon?" He proclaimed to the wind and the sky, which I have built as a royal dwelling by the might of my strength and for the glory of my majesty. The words fell from his mouth like stones dropped into calm water, sending ripples throughout the spiritual realm. The response arrived immediately, and with terrible swiftness. While the declaration was still on his lips, a voice descended from heaven like a thunderclap. O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you this message is spoken. The kingdom has been taken from you. The announcement resonated across the garden, though only the king's ears could perceive it. And you will be driven away from human society, the voice went on, and your dwelling will be with the wild animals of the field. You will be made to eat grass like cattle, and 7 periods of time will pass over you until you acknowledge that the Most High has supreme rule in the kingdom of humanity and bestows it upon whomever he chooses. In that precise hour, the judgment descended upon him. The king's rational mind, which had commanded vast armies and administered fair justice, began to shatter like a mirror struck by a stone. His thoughts dispersed like leaves scattered before a violent storm. The carefully built personality of a monarch dissolved into chaos and overwhelming terror. The transformation happened swiftly and completely. Nebuchadnezzar's courtly behavior vanished entirely. His regal bearing collapsed. He stared at his hands as though seeing them for the very first time, then at the garden surrounding him with eyes that no longer comprehended civilization or its purposes. The king of Babylon had become something altogether different. His attendants observed in horror as their master dropped to his hands and knees on the ground. He started tearing at the grass with his teeth, consuming it like an animal grazing in a field. His royal garments became soiled and ripped. His meticulously groomed beard grew wild and unkempt. The sight proved too horrifying for the court to witness. Quietly and efficiently, the machinery of palace administration moved to contain the unfolding crisis. The king was guided away from public observation, his condition concealed from the general population. Officials whispered of a temporary sickness, a time of rest and recuperation. But those who saw him with their own eyes understood that something far more profound had taken place. The gardens transformed into his wilderness. Within the expansive palace grounds, Nebuchadnezzar roamed like a soul lost and wandering. He no longer recognized the servants who had previously waited upon him. He felt fear of the buildings he had ordered to be constructed. His world had contracted to the immediate sensations of hunger, thirst, and the texture of grass beneath his grasping hands. His hair grew lengthy and untamed like the feathers of an eagle. His fingernails became like the claws of birds, hardened and curved by his new way of existing. The flesh that had been royal grew lean and bronzed from constant exposure to sun and rain. He who had once been dressed in purple robes and the finest linen now wore only the natural elements as his covering. Rain fell upon him without his recognition or understanding. He learned to seek protection under the spreading trees, huddling against their trunks like any creature of the woodland. The morning dew became his source of drink. The fruits that dropped from the trees became his meals. He lived as the animals of the field lived, governed by basic instinct rather than human reason. The court sustained its functions despite his absence. Trustworthy advisors managed the kingdom, following the laws and systems he had put in place. The great machine of empire kept running, but its heart was absent. Officials spoke in hushed tones about the king's condition, offering prayers for his eventual restoration. Seasons rotated in their timeless rhythm. Spring brought fresh grass for him to consume. Summer offered fruits and cooling shade. Autumn scattered seeds and nuts for his nourishment. Winter taught him to seek warmth in places offering shelter. 7 times the cycle completed itself, marking the duration of his judgment. Throughout all the wild years, something remained unchanging. Deep within the king's transformed mind, a small flame of awareness continued to flicker. He could not reason as humans reason, but he could sense the presence of something greater than himself. The God who had brought this judgment was also the God who sustained his life. The garden that had once been his source of pride became his instructor. The trees that had reminded him of his prophetic dream now sheltered him in actual reality. The grass he had once admired for its aesthetic beauty now kept him alive as food. Creation itself became his cathedral, teaching him lessons that no royal education could have provided. In the 7th year, as spring returned to the garden once more, something began to stir in the depths of his awareness. Like a person waking slowly from a long dream, Nebuchadnezzar started to remember who he had once been. The fog of madness lifted gradually, revealing the sky stretching above him and the understanding that had been absent for so long. Belshazzar's feast. The night atmosphere hung heavy with incense and wine as 1,000 nobles assembled in Babylon's most magnificent hall. King Belshazzar had ordered a feast to surpass all feasts, a celebration of power that future generations would remember. Golden vessels covered every table, their surfaces catching and reflecting the light of innumerable oil lamps. The noise of laughter and music bounced off the marble walls. Belshazzar was not Nebuchadnezzar's son by direct bloodline, but he ruled as his successor and heir. Young and filled with pride, he had inherited an empire at its zenith of power. The wealth of many nations poured into Babylon's treasure houses. The city's walls had never suffered a breach. The king felt invincible as he lifted his goblet to toast another night of revelry and celebration. The wine flowed like rivers coursing through the great hall. Servants wove between the tables carrying amphorae and pitchers, ensuring every cup stayed filled. The vintage was the empire's finest, aged in royal cellars for many decades. It loosened tongues and elevated spirits, transforming the feast into a carnival atmosphere of joy. Musicians performed from elevated platforms, their melodies threading through the conversations taking place. Harps sang their silvery songs, drums pounded out rhythms that made the heart want to dance. Flutes whistled like birds calling from faraway gardens. The music was a living entity, binding the celebration together with threads of harmonious sound. Dancers moved between the tables like water flowing. Their silk garments caught the lamplight, creating shifting patterns of color and shadow. Bells attached to their ankles chimed with every step they took. Their movements told ancient stories without spoken words, tales of gods and heroes, love and triumph. As the evening deepened and night grew darker, Belshazzar's mood became bolder. The wine had warmed his blood and awakened his pride. He looked around at the splendor encompassing him and felt the intoxication of absolute authority. An idea took shape in his wine-fogged mind, a gesture that would crown the evening's magnificence. "Bring out the golden vessels," he commanded, his voice projecting over the noise of celebration. "The vessels that my father Nebuchadnezzar carried away from the temple that stood in Jerusalem." A hush descended over the nearest tables as his command spread throughout the hall. The sacred vessels had been stored in Babylon's treasure house for many decades. They were the holy implements from Solomon's temple, created for the worship of the Hebrew God. Golden cups and silver bowls, each one consecrated for sacred purposes. No Babylonian hand had dared to touch them for common use. Servants rushed to obey the royal command. They returned, carrying the temple treasures, their faces showing trouble at the task they performed. The vessels gleamed brilliantly in the lamplight, more beautiful than anything crafted by Babylonian artisans. They seemed to carry an atmosphere of holiness that made the very air feel different. Belshazzar seized the largest golden cup with greedy hands. It had once held wine for temple sacrifices, blessed by Hebrew priests in Jerusalem's courts. Now it would serve an entirely different purpose. The king filled it with Babylon's finest vintage and raised it high above his head. "To the gods of gold and silver," he shouted, his voice echoing throughout the hall. "To the gods of bronze and iron, of wood and stone." The nobles cheered loudly and raised their own cups, following their king's lead. They drank deeply. their laughter ringing against the walls. The sacred vessels passed from one hand to another. Lords and ladies filled them with wine and drank in honor of Babylon's pagan deities. The cups that had once held the blood of sacrificial lambs now held the wine of a pagan celebration. The bowls that had caught holy oil now gleamed with ordinary wine. In that precise moment of supreme sacrilege, something shifted in the hall. The air became thick and oppressive, as if a storm were building. The laughter sounded forced, the music strained and off-key. A chill ran through the room despite the warmth radiating from 1,000 oil lamps burning. Then it manifested, a hand severed at the wrist, moving across the plastered wall. No body was visible, no arm to guide its movements, just fingers moving with intentional purpose, tracing letters in a script nobody could decipher. The lamplight illuminated the moving digits, making them appear to glow with an inner fire. The hall fell silent as a tomb. Goblets slipped from nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. Food turned to ashes in open mouths. Every eye fixed upon the ghostly hand as it continued its mysterious task. 4 words appeared on the wall, written in characters that seemed to burn themselves into the plaster surface. King Belshazzar's face lost all color. His knees knocked together beneath the table where he sat. His hands trembled so violently that wine spilled from his cup like blood flowing from a wound. The courage that wine had provided him evaporated like morning mist before the rising sun. "Bring in the astrologers," he cried out, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "Bring the Chaldeans and the soothsayers." The order went out through the palace like wildfire, spreading. Every wise man in Babylon received a summons to interpret the writing that had appeared so mysteriously. They came running, their robes billowing behind them as they rushed. The greatest scholars in the empire assembled before the wall, squinting at the strange script. They whispered among themselves, consulting ancient texts and comparing different interpretations. But the writing remained as mysterious as when it first appeared. The letters seemed to shift and dance before their eyes. Some thought they recognized Aramaic characters, others saw ancient Sumerian script. A few claimed the writing resembled Egyptian hieroglyphs, but none could reach agreement on what the words actually communicated. Hours passed in useless debate. The wise men argued and consulted their sources, but the meaning stayed hidden. The king's terror grew with each passing moment. He had offered lavish rewards for interpretation. Purple robes, chains of gold, 3rd place in the kingdom. But no amount of treasure could unlock the mystery. Finally, the Queen Mother entered the hall. She had not attended the feast, perhaps sensing the danger in such revelry. Her aged eyes took in the entire scene, the scattered vessels, the terrified king, the mysterious writing on the wall. Her voice cut through the chaos like a sharp sword. "O king, live forever," she said with a dignity that commanded immediate attention. "Do not let your thoughts trouble you, nor allow your countenance to change. There exists a man in your kingdom in whom dwells the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was discovered in him." She spoke of Daniel, the Hebrew who had served Nebuchadnezzar so faithfully for many years. In him was discovered an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, and the ability to interpret dreams and solve difficult riddles. If anyone could read the writing on the wall, it would be this man who had served the royal house for decades. The summons went out into the night. Daniel, now an elderly man with silver threading through his beard, was brought before the terrified king. He entered the hall with quiet dignity, his eyes taking in the scene of debauchery and fear. The sacred vessels caught his attention, and sorrow flickered across his weathered face. Belshazzar's voice trembled as he made his desperate plea. "If you can read this writing and make known to me its interpretation, you will be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold placed around your neck and will be made the 3rd ruler in the kingdom." The offer was generous, but Daniel had served God too long to be influenced by earthly rewards. The lion's den. Years had passed since the writing appeared on Belshazzar's wall. The Babylonian Empire had collapsed under Persian conquest, precisely as Daniel had prophesied. King Cyrus ruled with wisdom and mercy, but it was his successor Darius who would face the greatest test of his reign. The challenge would come not from foreign armies threatening, but from the faith of one elderly man. Daniel had served faithfully under 3 empires. His hair was now white as winter snow, his face marked with lines earned through decades of wisdom. Yet his mind remained sharp as any blade, his spirit unbroken by the passing years. The new Persian administration had recognized his value, promoting him to high office once more. The kingdom was divided into provinces, each governed by a president appointed by royal authority. Daniel was chief among these leaders, set over all the others because of his excellent spirit and exceptional abilities. The younger officials watched him with conflicting emotions: respect for his capabilities, envy for his elevated position, and frustration at his incorruptible character. They searched for flaws in his administration, like prospectors hunting desperately for gold. His finances were examined down to the smallest coin. His official decisions were scrutinized for any signs of favoritism or corruption. His personal life was investigated for any hint of scandal or wrongdoing, but they found absolutely nothing. Daniel's integrity was like armor, protecting him from every accusation they could devise. The Persian officials gathered in secret councils, their voices kept low with conspiracy. "We will not find any occasion against this Daniel," they admitted reluctantly, "except we find it against him concerning the law of his God." His faithfulness to the Hebrew faith was well known throughout the entire kingdom. A plan formed in their whispered conversations. They would use Daniel's devotion against him, turning his greatest strength into his downfall. The trap they designed was elegant in its simplicity. They would make prayer itself a crime, knowing that Daniel would never abandon his daily communion with God. They approached King Darius with smooth words and false concern for his welfare. "O king, live forever," they began, their voices heavy with feigned loyalty. "All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree." The proposed law seemed reasonable on its surface. For 30 days, no one in the kingdom should pray to any god or person except King Darius himself. Anyone who violated this decree would be cast into the den of lions. It appeared to be a test of loyalty, a method to unify the diverse kingdom under Persian rule. Darius was flattered by the proposal. The idea that his subjects would pray only to him for a month appealed strongly to his royal pride. He failed to see the trap that had been carefully laid, the net that would soon entangle his most faithful servant. The king signed the decree with his royal seal, making it unalterable according to the law of the Medes and Persians. Daniel learned of the new law within hours of its signing. The news reached him as he sat in his chamber reviewing the day's administrative duties. His servants whispered the details with worried faces, knowing their master's habits well. For decades, he had prayed 3 times daily, facing toward Jerusalem. The law made this practice punishable by death. The old man received the news with perfect calm. He thanked his servants for their warning, then dismissed them gently. Alone in his chamber, he considered his options. He could pray in secret, hiding his devotion from prying eyes. He could suspend his prayers for 30 days, resuming them when the decree expired. Or he could continue as he always had, trusting God with the consequences. The choice was never really in doubt. Daniel had served his God faithfully for over 70 years. He had faced the furnace of persecution, the wilderness of exile, the flames of political intrigue. His faith had been tested in fire and found pure. He would not compromise now in the twilight years of his life. That evening, Daniel knelt at his window, as he had for decades. The shutters were open as they had always been. His face turned toward Jerusalem, as was his custom. His voice rose in familiar prayers, seeking God's blessing on the kingdom, protection for his people, and wisdom for the challenges lying ahead. The conspirators watched from hiding places across the street. They saw him kneeling, heard the sound of his prayers, witnessed the very evidence they needed. Triumph filled their hearts as they rushed to report to the king. Darius received their news with horror. He realized immediately that he had been manipulated, that his pride had been used as a weapon against his most faithful servant. The decree he had signed in vanity now threatened to destroy the man he valued most highly. But the law of the Medes and Persians could not be changed, even by the king who had made it. The rest of that day passed like a nightmare. Darius labored until sunset, seeking some legal loophole that might save Daniel's life. He consulted with lawyers and scholars, searched ancient precedents, and explored every possible escape route. But the law stood firm, immutable as stone carved in granite. As evening shadows lengthened, the accusers returned to the palace. Their voices carried the weight of inevitability. Know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree nor statute which the king establishes may be changed. The trap was complete. Even royal power could not undo what royal pride had created. The fall of Babylon. The night was still and quiet when the waters began to drop. Along the banks of the Euphrates River, Persian engineers worked in silence, their shovels and picks redirecting the ancient flow. King Cyrus had planned his conquest with the patience of a master strategist. While Babylon feasted, his army prepared to walk where water once ran. The great city slept behind walls that had never been breached. These ramparts rose like cliffs from the desert floor, wide enough for chariots to race along their tops. Guard towers punctuated their length like stone sentinels watching. The watchmen stood confident in Babylon's impregnability. No army had ever taken the city by storm. Cyrus understood that force alone would not open Babylon's gates. The Persian king had studied his enemy with the care of a dedicated scholar, learning the city's strengths and weaknesses. The Euphrates flowed directly through Babylon's heart, providing water, but also creating a potential path for those clever enough to use it. His plan was elegant in its simplicity. Miles upstream from the city, Persian workers had dug channels and built dams. When the signal came, they would divert the river into new courses, lowering the water level within Babylon itself. The riverbed would become a highway for conquest. Inside the city, Belshazzar's feast continued in glorious oblivion. The sacred vessels gleamed in the lamplight, filled with wine and laughter. The mysterious writing on the wall had been interpreted, but its warning seemed distant as a half-remembered dream. Death felt impossible in a hall filled with such life and luxury. Daniel's words echoed in the king's memory like the tolling of a bell. God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. But wine and music had a way of drowning out prophecy. The water level dropped foot by foot throughout the long night. Persian soldiers gathered at appointed places along the riverbank, waiting for the signal to advance. They had muffled their weapons and darkened their armor. This victory would be won by stealth, not strength. Babylon's river gates were massive bronze barriers that rose and fell with the water level. As the Euphrates receded, gaps appeared beneath these fortifications. What had been impossible became merely difficult. What had been impregnable became penetrable. The first Persian scouts slipped through the muddy gap like ghosts moving. They found themselves in the city's heart, surrounded by sleeping buildings and empty streets. Most citizens had no idea that enemy soldiers now walked among them. The conquest had begun without a battle cry or clash of arms. More soldiers followed, their numbers growing with each passing hour. They moved through Babylon's districts like a slow tide, securing key positions and surrounding important buildings. The palace quarter was isolated. The temple complex was surrounded. The city was being conquered from within. Dawn found Babylon changed forever. Persian banners flew from the walls where Babylonian eagles had perched for centuries. The gates stood open, their massive doors swinging freely for the first time in decades. Citizens emerged from their homes to find a new empire governing their streets. Cyrus entered his conquest with the dignity of a true king. No buildings were burned. No citizens were harmed, no treasures were looted for personal gain. The Persian king understood that empires were ruled by consent as much as force. His victory would be remembered for its mercy. The palace surrendered without resistance. Belshazzar had vanished in the night, perhaps killed in the confusion, or fled to distant provinces. His courtiers knelt before the new ruler, offering their submission with the pragmatic wisdom of survivors. The feast hall stood empty, its golden vessels scattered like leaves. Royal scribes worked quickly to establish the new order. Decrees went out in multiple languages, assuring the people of Babylon that their lives would continue much as before. Persian law would replace Babylonian custom, but gradually, and with respect for local traditions, Daniel was summoned to the palace in those first days of transition. The old prophet approached the throne room with measured steps, his white beard flowing like silk. He had served under Babylonian kings for 70 years. Now he would offer his wisdom to Persian rulers. Cyrus received him with the honor due to a sage. The Persian king had heard of Daniel's reputation for wisdom and integrity. He needed such men to help govern his vast empire, administrators who could be trusted with power and responsibility. The Hebrew prophet represented continuity in a time of change. "Your God has given me all the kingdoms of the earth," Cyrus told Daniel, his words echoing ancient prophecies. "He has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah." The king's decree would soon permit the Hebrew exiles to return to their homeland, carrying with them treasures and hopes. The changeover was remarkably peaceful. Persian officials replaced Babylonian governors with quiet efficiency. New laws were published and explained. Trade routes remained open. Life in the great city continued its ancient rhythm, but under new management and with new possibilities. Babylon's fall marked the end of an era. For centuries, the city had been the center of the known world, its influence reaching from Egypt to India. Its scholars had mapped the stars and calculated the movements of planets. Its merchants had carried goods and ideas across continents. Its power had seemed eternal. Yet, like all earthly kingdoms, it had proven temporary. The walls that seemed impregnable had been bypassed. The waters that provided security had become highways for conquest. The pride that sustained its glory had blinded its leaders to approaching danger. In a single night, the world's greatest city had become a Persian province. The transition taught lessons that wise men would remember for generations. Empires rise and fall like waves on the shore. Walls cannot protect hearts hardened by pride. True security comes not from military might, but from divine favor. The God who raises up kingdoms can also bring them down. Babylon would continue to exist for centuries more, but never again as the center of world power. Its glory days were finished. Its imperial dreams ended. The city that had once ruled nations would learn to serve new masters, accepting the changes that time and providence brought. Cyrus, the gentle conqueror. In the year 539 before Christ, as autumn winds whispered across the dusty plains of Mesopotamia, a different kind of conqueror approached Babylon's mighty walls. His name was Cyrus of Persia, and history would remember him not for the cities he burned or the peoples he enslaved, but for something far more unusual. He came as a liberator. The great gates of Babylon stood open. No siege engines thundered against the walls. No battering rams pounded the bronze-plated doors. Instead, Cyrus walked through the streets like a welcomed guest, his Persian robes flowing in the gentle breeze that carried the scent of date palms and river water. Babylon had fallen without a single arrow fired in anger. The city's priests had grown weary of their mad king Nabonidus, who spent his days worshipping the moon god Sin while neglecting Marduk, the patron deity of their beloved city. When Cyrus promised to honor their gods and restore their temples, the gates swung wide. The Persian king understood something that countless conquerors before him had missed. True power came not from crushing the spirit of a people, but from embracing their dreams. He walked through Babylon's markets, greeting merchants in their own tongue. He bowed before the statue of Marduk in the great temple, offering prayers as if he had been born beside the Euphrates. In the royal palace, where Nebuchadnezzar once interpreted dreams and Belshazzar saw ghostly writing on walls, Cyrus sat upon the throne with quiet dignity. He wore no crown of gold, demanded no tribute of silver. Instead, he called for his scribes and dictated words that would echo through centuries. "I am Cyrus, king of the world, great king, mighty king," the cylinder proclaimed in cuneiform script. But then came the revolutionary part. "When I entered Babylon peacefully, I took up my lordly residence in the royal palace amid joy and happiness. I returned the sacred images of the gods to their sanctuaries." The cylinder spoke of freedom for the displaced peoples. Exiles could return to their homelands, temples could be rebuilt, ancient customs could be restored. It was a decree unlike any the world had seen, carved in clay and baked hard as stone. Persian soldiers walked the streets of Babylon, not as occupiers but as protectors. They helped rebuild shrines that had fallen into disrepair. They escorted families of exiles to the city gates, providing them with supplies for their journeys home. The empire Cyrus built would stretch from India to Greece, yet it ruled through respect rather than fear. In the evenings, as the sun painted the Euphrates golden, Cyrus would walk along the river's edge. Local fishermen nodded respectfully as he passed. Children played in the dusty streets, unafraid of the foreign king who spoke gently and kept his promises. This was conquest transformed into something beautiful. The hanging gardens still bloomed under Persian care. Water flowed through their terraces as it had for centuries. The ziggurat of Marduk rose toward heaven, its steps worn smooth by countless pilgrims. Life in Babylon continued much as it always had, but with a new sense of hope. Cyrus established a new kind of empire, one that celebrated diversity rather than demanding uniformity. Local governors ruled according to ancient customs. Priests performed rituals in languages their fathers had spoken for 1,000 years. The Persian king had discovered that an empire of willing subjects was far stronger than one built on resentment and rebellion. Years passed peacefully in Babylon under Persian rule. The city remained prosperous, its canals flowing with clear water, its markets bustling with goods from across the known world. Caravans arrived from distant lands, bringing spices from India, silk from the Far East, precious stones from the mountains of Afghanistan. When Cyrus died in battle far from Babylon, defending his empire's distant borders, the city mourned him as they would a beloved father. His successors continued his gentle policies, understanding that their grandfather's wisdom had created something precious and rare. The Persian Empire would endure for 2 centuries, and much of its strength came from this moment when a conqueror chose compassion over cruelty. Cyrus had shown the world that true greatness lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to preserve and protect what was beautiful in human civilization. In Babylon's quiet temples, priests still offered prayers of gratitude for the king who had restored their sacred traditions. The city slept peacefully under Persian stars, dreaming of the gentle conqueror who had chosen to build bridges rather than walls. The return to Zion. Dawn broke softly over Babylon as families gathered their precious belongings, preparing for a journey that would carry them away from the only home many had ever known. After 70 years in exile, the people of Judah were finally free to return to Jerusalem. The decree of Cyrus had opened doors that seemed forever sealed. Along the dusty roads leading west from Babylon, a slow procession began to form. Wagons creaked under the weight of household goods, sacred vessels, and carefully wrapped scrolls containing the precious words of their faith. Children who had never seen the hills of Judea walked beside grandparents who remembered Solomon's temple in all its glory. The journey stretched nearly 1,000 miles across desert and mountain, river and plain. Each step carried them farther from the land where they had learned to sing the Lord's song in a strange place, closer to the homeland their hearts had never forgotten. The road dust settled on their robes like a benediction, marking their passage from captivity to freedom. Zerubbabel led the first group of returning exiles, his name meaning seed of Babylon. He carried with him the gold and silver vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple decades earlier. These sacred objects had been carefully preserved in Babylonian treasuries, waiting for this moment of restoration. The Persian king had been generous beyond their wildest dreams. Not only were they free to leave, but they were given supplies for the journey and materials to rebuild their temple. Cyrus understood that a people restored to their ancestral home would become loyal subjects of his vast empire. As the caravan moved through the Syrian desert, older exiles shared stories of Jerusalem with younger generations. They described the temple's courtyards, where priests had offered sacrifices, the streets where David had once walked, the hills where prophets had proclaimed God's word. These memories, kept alive through decades of longing, would soon become reality. The road was long and often difficult. Summer heat beat down mercilessly during the day, while nights brought desert cold that chilled to the bone. Wells were few and precious. Sandstorms forced them to shelter behind their wagons, waiting for the wind to calm. Yet spirits remained high, sustained by the promise of home. Some families chose to remain in Babylon. They had built lives along the rivers of Mesopotamia, established businesses, raised children who spoke Aramaic as easily as Hebrew. The exile had lasted 3 generations. For many, Babylon had become home in ways that Jerusalem could never be again. But thousands answered the call to return. They came from all walks of life, priests and Levites ready to restore temple worship, craftsmen eager to rebuild the city's walls, farmers who dreamed of planting vineyards in the hills of Judah, teachers who carried the law in their hearts and scrolls in their packs. The caravans stretched for miles, a river of people flowing westward toward their ancestral home. Persian soldiers provided protection, ensuring safe passage through territories where bandits might otherwise have struck. This was Cyrus's gift to the returning exiles, a guarantee of safety on their journey to freedom. When they crested the final hill and saw Jerusalem spread before them, many wept. The city lay in ruins, its walls broken, its buildings crumbled. Weeds grew in the temple courtyards. Wild animals had made their homes in the rubble of once proud houses. Yet this was still the city of David, the place where God had chosen to dwell among his people. The work of rebuilding began immediately. Families cleared debris from ancient foundations, searching for building stones that could be used again. The altar was rebuilt first, allowing sacrifices to be offered even before the temple itself was restored. The sound of hammers and chisels rang out across the city as Jerusalem slowly came back to life. Not everyone welcomed their return. Local peoples who had settled in the land during the exile viewed the newcomers with suspicion. Political tensions arose as returning exiles claimed ancestral properties. The work of rebuilding was complicated by opposition from those who preferred the status quo. Yet the community persevered under the leadership of Ezra and Nehemiah, who arrived in later waves of return. Jerusalem's walls were rebuilt and its temple restored. The city that had once been the jewel of David's kingdom began to shine again, though it would never quite recapture the glory of Solomon's day. Many of the returning exiles carried with them something precious beyond gold or silver. They brought scrolls containing the writings of prophets who had sustained their faith during the dark years of exile, Isaiah's words of comfort, Jeremiah's promises of restoration, Ezekiel's visions of a new temple. These texts would form the heart of the Hebrew Bible, preserving for all time the story of exile and return. The Persian Empire made this return possible, but it was faith that sustained the journey. The belief that God had not forgotten his people, that promises made in ancient times would be fulfilled, that home was not just a place, but a calling. The return to Zion became a pattern of hope that would echo through centuries whenever people found themselves far from home and longing for restoration. Babylon, after the empire. The great city settled into a gentler rhythm as the Persian Empire matured around it. No longer the capital of the world, Babylon became something perhaps more precious, a place where cultures met and mingled like tributaries flowing into a great river. The ancient walls still stood strong, but they enclosed a different kind of kingdom now. Persian administrators governed from the palace where Nebuchadnezzar once dreamed his troubling dreams. They wore different robes and spoke a different language, but they treated the city with respect. The temples remained active, their priests still performing rituals that stretched back to the dawn of civilization. Marduk's ziggurat continued to rise toward heaven, a stairway of brick and ancient prayers. Babylonian scholars found new purpose under Persian rule. The great library collections, written in cuneiform on countless clay tablets, became treasures sought by learned men from across the empire. Students came from distant provinces to study mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and law in the schools that had flourished here for over 1,000 years. The Hanging Gardens, if they truly existed, probably reached their most magnificent form during these peaceful years. Persian gardeners, masters of irrigation and landscape design, would have understood and appreciated such an ambitious project. Water flowed through carefully designed channels, nourishing exotic plants from across the known world. Trade flourished as never before. The Persian royal road connected Babylon to Persepolis and beyond, carrying merchants and their goods in both directions. Silk from distant China passed through Babylonian markets. Spices from India perfumed the air around the trading posts. Gold from Lydia jingled in the purses of wealthy citizens. The city's reputation for learning attracted scholars from Greece, Egypt, and other centers of civilization. They came to study the astronomical observations that Babylonian priests had been recording for centuries. The movements of planets, the cycles of eclipses, the intricate dance of celestial bodies, all carefully noted and preserved in the temple archives. Babylonian mathematics influenced thinkers throughout the Persian Empire. The base 60 number system, which gave us 60-minute hours and 360-degree circles, spread along the trade routes. Young mathematicians learned to solve complex problems using methods developed beside the Euphrates centuries earlier. And the old tensions between conquered and conqueror gradually faded. Mixed marriages flourished throughout the empire. Noble families from Persia formed unions with Babylonian households, just as Babylonian traders built lives for themselves in Persepolis and across Persian territories. The empire drew its power from this blending, this fusion of customs and capabilities. The spiritual landscape shifted to accommodate new realities. Babylon's age-old deities continued receiving their tributes and devotions, yet they now coexisted alongside Persian gods and the spiritual practices of countless other peoples under imperial rule. This acceptance of diverse beliefs, truly groundbreaking for that era, fostered a harmonious coexistence rarely matched by other empires throughout history. Those who came after Cyrus upheld his approach of honoring regional traditions. Darius the Great made multiple journeys to Babylon, taking part in ceremonial observances and meeting with local administrators. The city thrived in contentment, serving as a crown jewel within the Persian realm instead of merely a conquered territory. The renowned Ishtar Gate, adorned with its stunning azure tiles and gilded creatures, greeted travelers arriving from every corner of the known world. Those who journeyed there documented their wonder at the city's magnificence and prosperity. Babylon had transformed into a living symbol of what humanity could accomplish when diverse peoples united in cooperative harmony. With the passage of decades, memories of autonomy gradually dimmed. New generations of Babylonians came of age as citizens of Persia, taking positions within the imperial bureaucracy and armed forces. Several climbed to positions of prominence, counseling monarchs and overseeing entire provinces. The city's centuries-old administrative expertise found fresh purpose in service to the Persian state. The grand celebrations persisted, largely unchanged from ancient times. During the New Year festivities, Marduk's sacred image was paraded through the avenues in ceremonial dignity, attracting observers from throughout the empire. Sometimes the king himself would join these processions, paying respect to the time-honored customs that had elevated Babylon to greatness. When evening descended, the city took on a distinctive enchantment. Oil lamps glowed in windows across the residential quarters. Sounds of merriment and dialogue floated down from rooftop terraces. Young ones played in central courtyards as their elders reviewed the day's activities. The river mirrored the city's illumination, creating a duplicate Babylon within the dark, flowing waters. Persian-era Babylon arguably became the most culturally diverse metropolis the world had witnessed to that point. A multitude of languages filled its marketplaces. Dining establishments offered cuisines representing every region of the empire. Sacred spaces honored deities from faraway territories. This was a place where diversity was embraced rather than feared. This golden period of cultural integration would span 200 years, establishing a blueprint for acceptance and collaboration that subsequent empires would find challenging to replicate. Babylon had discovered a different form of greatness, not through conquest, but as a connector between civilizations. Alexander drew his last breath. The youthful monarch who had claimed dominion over the known world entered Babylon one spring day in 323, before the Common Era. His physical form was already deteriorating, though his determination remained as fierce as always. Alexander from Macedonia had led his forces from Greek highlands to Indian coastlines, securing triumph after triumph. Now he came seeking respite in this ancient metropolis that had witnessed countless empires emerge and collapse. Babylon received him as it had received conquerors throughout history. The massive gates opened wide. Religious leaders offered sacred words. Citizens crowded the thoroughfares to glimpse this fair-haired young ruler who had brought the formidable Persian Empire to its knees. Yet Alexander arrived not as a destroyer but as a visionary, intending to establish Babylon as the heart of his new global empire. The royal residence that had sheltered Nebuchadnezzar and Persian sovereigns now resonated with Greek conversation. Alexander's trusted followers, warriors who had accompanied him across half the globe, wandered the ancient passages with amazement. They stood in awe before the hanging gardens, examined astronomical records within the temples, traversed the protective walls that had defended the city for more than a millennium. Ambitious plans blossomed in Alexander's restless imagination like desert flowers after rainfall. He envisioned reconstructing Marduk's great ziggurat, making it even more spectacular than its original form. Fresh harbors would be excavated to receive vessels from his expanding fleet. Transportation routes would link Babylon to every corner of his immense empire. The city would serve as the central point of a network spanning the entire known world. However, the young king's body, exhausted beyond its limits by years of relentless military campaigns, started to fail his magnificent aspirations. Illness struck him within the palace chambers where ancient monarchs had once governed. Medical practitioners could offer no remedy. The man who had conquered armies found himself unable to conquer the invisible adversary burning through his bloodstream. While Alexander lay dying in the royal quarters, his military commanders assembled around his sickbed like scavengers. They were already dividing his empire amongst themselves, each staking claim to a portion of the world he had conquered. The cohesion he had maintained through sheer force of character would disintegrate the instant he drew his final breath. The city waited anxiously as word of the king's deteriorating condition spread through the streets. Babylonians had witnessed many rulers arrive and depart, but this one was unique. He had vowed to make their city the world's greatest. He had wed a Persian noblewoman in an elaborate ceremony held here, symbolically joining East with West. His passing would leave those aspirations unrealized. Alexander's dying words, as legend recounts, came when questioned about who should succeed him. To the strongest, he reportedly murmured, though some insisted he said Craterus, naming one of his most loyal generals. This ambiguity would trigger decades of warfare as his successors battled over the spoils of his conquests. The great conqueror passed away on the 10th of June in his 33rd year of life. His remains were laid in a golden burial container, though his generals would subsequently fight over even this final resting place. The empire he had constructed through 13 years of continuous warfare began fracturing before his funeral rites concluded. Babylon observed the peculiar sight of grown warriors mourning the death of a foreign sovereign. Alexander's soldiers, who had followed him faithfully through wastelands and mountain ranges, grieved like children who had lost their protector. Without his magnetic leadership, they were merely hired soldiers, far from their homeland. The city's religious leaders conducted the ancient death rituals for a departed king. Though Alexander had governed Babylon less than 2 years, they recognized something in him that transcended nationality or cultural identity. He had possessed what the Babylonians called melamu, the divine luminescence marking a legitimate ruler. In the days after Alexander's death, his commanders partitioned his empire like merchants splitting inventory at market. Babylon became the prize of Seleucus, among his most skilled commanders, who would found a dynasty ruling Mesopotamia for over 2 centuries. The city's destiny was determined by ambitious men who viewed it as treasure to claim rather than community to cherish. Still, something from Alexander's vision survived in Babylon. The blending of Greek and Persian cultures he had encouraged continued under those who followed him. Babylonian stargazers studied Greek mathematical principles. Greek stone carvers learned Mesopotamian methods. The city became a crossroads where Eastern and Western traditions merged in ways that enriched both. The palace where Alexander expired became a pilgrimage destination for his devotees. They traveled to honor his memory and recall the man who had dreamed of bringing the world under unified rule. His death signified the conclusion of one era and the beginning of another, as the Hellenistic successor, states that emerged from his empire, started writing their own historical chapters. Babylon had witnessed the passing of numerous great rulers, but none quite like Alexander. He had come as a conqueror, yet died as a dreamer. His grand schemes remained incomplete, but his concept of cultural unity would influence the world for centuries ahead. The ancient city, which had observed the rise and decline of so many empires, quietly prepared to outlast yet another dynasty. As darkness fell over the Euphrates on the day Alexander died, the river maintained its timeless journey toward the ocean. Babylon had endured Assyrians and Persians, and it would endure Greeks as well. The city's genuine strength had never rested in its military forces, but in its capacity to adapt, to persist, to transform conquerors into community members. Alexander's death represented not a conclusion, but another chapter in the extended narrative of this extraordinary place, the structure that reached toward heaven. In the misty dawn of ancient epochs, when the earth was young and human hearts blazed with impossible dreams, there arose a structure that stretched toward the celestial realm. Its builders named it Etemenanki, meaning house of the foundation of heaven and earth. Yet the world would know it by a different name, the Tower of Babel. The narrative commences with a people sharing one tongue and one collective aspiration. They had wandered the earth following the great deluge, searching for territory to claim as home. Upon reaching the plain of Shinar, alongside the flowing Euphrates, they chose to establish themselves there. The earth was fertile, the water pure, and the level ground extended limitlessly in every direction. "Come," They urged one another, "Let us fashion bricks and construct a city for ourselves." They had mastered the art of molding clay into rectangular blocks, firing them solid in massive ovens. These bricks would prove stronger than stone, more consistent than timber. With such building materials, they believed their minds could conceive anything achievable, yet merely building a city failed to satisfy hearts filled with such ambition. "Let us construct a tower," they proclaimed, "whose summit may reach unto the heavens." They envisioned a structure so immense that its peak would touch the realm where gods resided. Through this tower, they would establish their reputation and ensure they would never be dispersed across the earth again. Labor commenced at sunrise each morning as the eastern sky turned golden. Thousands of workers transported bricks up the ascending ramps, each brick positioned with attention and exactness. The tower grew gradually yet consistently, casting an increasingly lengthy shadow across the surrounding metropolis. Children played within that shadow, their voices rising up the enormous walls. The builders divided themselves into work crews, each accountable for a construction section. Expert artisans supervised the labor. Consulting blueprints inscribed on clay tablets, architects calculated stress and load-bearing capacity, ensuring the base could support the massive weight. The undertaking consumed the energies of an entire civilization. As the tower climbed higher, the workers underwent changes. Pride infiltrated their hearts like contamination in a water source. They started believing nothing remained impossible for them, that they could challenge heaven itself. The tower evolved from merely a testament to human accomplishment into an emblem of human arrogance. Years elapsed, and the tower achieved heights no building had ever reached before. From its elevated platforms, workers could see farther than any human had previously seen. Rivers resembled silver threads. Cities appeared like miniature toys. The Earth's curvature itself became observable on cloudless days. Yet as the tower climbed toward the heavens, the builders' unity began fracturing. Arguments emerged over techniques and materials. Different groups developed their own terminology for discussing the work. What had started as one language slowly separated into dialects, then into entirely distinct tongues. The confusion intensified with each passing day. Workers could no longer comprehend their overseers. Architects could not communicate their plans to the laborers. The careful coordination that had enabled the tower's construction dissolved into chaos and miscommunication. The great undertaking ground to a complete halt. God gazed down upon the tower and the people constructing it. He observed their pride, their ambition to make themselves equal to the divine. "Behold," he declared, "the people are unified, and they all share one language. Nothing will remain impossible for them." The unity that could have accomplished great good was being corrupted by unlimited ambition. Therefore the Lord scattered the languages of humanity, confounding the speech of the builders. Where previously there had been one people with one purpose, now there existed many tribes speaking many languages. They could no longer cooperate on their grand undertaking. The tower stood incomplete, a monument to both human ambition and human limitation. The people abandoned their magnificent tower and scattered throughout the earth, carrying their new languages with them. Some journeyed north into mountainous regions, others south toward coastal areas. They established new cities and founded new nations, but they never again attempted constructing a tower reaching heaven. The deserted tower remained standing for centuries, gradually deteriorating as wind and precipitation eroded its carefully positioned bricks. Local inhabitants called it Babel, meaning confusion, remembering the day when language itself became a barrier separating human hearts. Birds made nests in its openings, and climbing plants grew along its walls. Yet the tower's narrative lived on, transmitted through generations in the languages that had originated from its confusion. Every culture, hearing the tale, grasped its lesson. Human achievement holds value, but human pride presents danger. The aspiration to reach heaven possesses nobility, but only when emerging from humility rather than arrogance. In Babylon, where the ancient tower supposedly stood, people constructed new ziggurats that also reached skyward. However, these were temples, not monuments to human pride. They served as stairways for gods to descend to earth, not ladders for mortals to ascend to heaven. The lesson from Babel had been absorbed. The Tower of Babel's story became one of humanity's great warning tales. It reminded people that unity represents a gift requiring cherishment, that communication represents a blessing requiring protection, and that humanity's highest achievements emerge not from pride, but from cooperation, guided by wisdom. Even today, when travelers observe the remnants of ancient ziggurats rising from desert sands, they recall the story of the tower that reached toward heaven. It stands as a reminder that human dreams achieve their greatest beauty when they acknowledge the divine mystery lying beyond our grasp, echoes within revelation. In the final book of the Christian scriptures, written upon the rocky isle of Patmos by an exile called John, Babylon reappears as a vision shrouded in mystery and foreboding. However, this is not the historical city of Nebuchadnezzar or Cyrus. This is Babylon, transformed into symbol, a spiritual empire encompassing the world, yet containing the seeds of its own downfall. The Apostle John, exiled to his island prison for proclaiming Jesus' message, received visions lifting him beyond the constraints of time and space. Within these revelations he observed a woman adorned in purple and scarlet, seated upon a scarlet beast, bearing 7 heads and 10 horns. Upon her brow was inscribed a name, Mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and earthly abominations. This Babylon was not constructed from brick and mortar, but from human pride and spiritual defiance. She was intoxicated with the wine of her fornication, corrupting earth's kings through her seductive power. Merchants prospered through her excessive luxuries, while the impoverished suffered beneath her shadow. She represented everything the ancient city had once symbolized to its adversaries: wealth constructed on oppression, beauty concealing inner corruption. John observed in his vision how this symbolic Babylon grasped a golden cup filled with abominations. The cup gleamed brilliantly, attracting all who glimpsed it, yet its contents poisoned the soul. This represented the intoxication of worldly power, the false promise that material wealth could fulfill spiritual hunger. The beast carrying Babylon was covered with blasphemous inscriptions representing the political and economic structures enabling such corruption. Its 7 heads symbolized Rome's hills, making clear that John addressed the imperial system of his contemporary period. Yet the vision extended beyond any single empire to encompass all forms of worldly power opposing God. An angel disclosed to John the significance of his vision. The waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. The angel explained, Babylon's power originated not from military might alone, but from her ability to seduce entire populations into worshipping wealth, comfort, and earthly success, rather than pursuing spiritual truth. However, this symbolic Babylon carried within herself the promise of her own collapse. The beast that carries her will hate her, the angel prophesied. They will make her desolate and naked, will consume her flesh and burn her with fire. The very forces that enabled her corruption would eventually turn against her, devouring what they had once sustained. John observed a mighty angel lift a stone like a great millstone and hurl it into the sea, declaring, Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be cast down, and shall be found no more at all. The vision spoke of sudden, complete destruction, not gradual decline but catastrophic collapse. The lament that followed ranked among Scripture's most haunting passages. Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, cried earth's kings as they watched her burn. For in 1 hour is your judgment come. The merchants wept, seeing their wealth source disappear in smoke and flame. Even the sailors and sea captains mourned, crying out when they saw the smoke of her burning. What city is like unto this great city? They cast dust upon their heads and wailed, for their livelihood had depended upon her prosperity. In 1 hour, such immense riches had vanished to nothing. Yet not everyone mourned Babylon's collapse. A voice from heaven cried, "Rejoice over her, you heavens, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her." Those who had suffered under her oppression celebrated her destruction as divine justice finally fulfilled. The vision then shifted to reveal what would replace fallen Babylon. John observed a new Jerusalem descending from heaven like a bride adorned for her husband. This city required no temple, for God himself would dwell there. No sun or moon would illuminate it, for the Lamb's glory would be its light. The contrast could not have been more striking. Where Babylon represented human pride and rebellion, the New Jerusalem embodied divine grace and restoration. Where Babylon corrupted through her wealth and power, the New Jerusalem healed through the river of life flowing from God's throne. This prophetic use of Babylon's name ensured the ancient city would live forever in human memory, not merely as a historical location, but as a spiritual concept. Throughout Christian history, believers would apply Babylon's name to any system, seemingly embodying worldly pride and opposition to God's kingdom. The Babylon of Revelation was simultaneously specific and universal. It addressed John's contemporaries about the Roman Empire oppressing them, but it also addressed future generations about every form of spiritual corruption that would emerge. The name became a lens through which believers could understand the ongoing conflict between God's kingdom and the kingdoms of this world. In quiet moments, as Mediterranean waves lapped against Patmos's shores, John must have reflected on the visions he had received. The historical Babylon had collapsed centuries earlier, but its spiritual legacy persisted in new forms. His apocalyptic writing ensured the city's name would continue echoing through time. A perpetual warning about the seductive danger of power without humility, wealth without justice, and human achievement without divine blessing. Archaeologists within the dust. In the quiet heat of an Iraqi morning, dust swirls around careful hands holding delicate brushes. The year is 1899, and a German team led by Robert Koldewey begins uncovering what had been sleeping beneath centuries of sand. They don't yet realize it, but they're about to awaken Babylon from its lengthy slumber. The tells, those gentle hills dotting the landscape, conceal more than earth and stone. Each layer holds whispers from different ages. Koldewey's team works slowly, methodically, as archaeologists must. They understand that hastiness would destroy the very stories they've come to hear. The first discoveries emerge like dreams becoming tangible. Pieces of glazed brick, brilliant blue even after 2,500 years. The diggers pause, brush away more sand, and observe the outline of something magnificent. It's a wall, but not just any wall. The colors shine through the dirt like jewels awaiting cleaning. Month by month, season by season, ancient Babylon's shape reveals itself. The famous Ishtar Gate emerges from its earthen bed. Each blue brick decorated with golden animals that seem to pace eternally along the walls. Lions, bulls, and dragons march in perfect rows, their eyes still bright with ancient fire. Yet archaeology moves at patience's pace. Each fragment must be catalogued, each layer mapped and photographed. The German team creates detailed drawings, takes careful measurements, records every discovery in neat handwriting. They know they're holding pieces of stories that kings and prophets once inhabited. The ziggurat foundations appear next, massive and square, rising from the desert floor like the base of some forgotten mountain. Workers clear away tons of accumulated sand and debris. What they find amazes them. The tower that may have inspired the Babel tale, its bricks still fitted together with ancient precision. Cuneiform tablets emerge by the thousands, Most are business records, lists of grain and sheep, payments and debts, but others contain poetry, prayers, and royal chronicles. Each tablet represents hours of careful work by long-dead scribes, their wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay when the world was young. The excavation reveals Babylon's double walls, those mighty fortifications that once made the city seem unconquerable. Archaeologists measure their thickness, trace their path around the ancient city limits. They find gates buried beneath rubble, streets paved with baked brick, foundations of houses where families once gathered in the evening light. French archaeologist André Parrot continues the work decades later, uncovering Mari, one of Babylon's rival cities. His discoveries fill in more pieces of the puzzle. Palace walls covered in frescoes, diplomatic letters between ancient kings, treasure rooms that held golden cups and silver jewelry. The 20th century brings new challenges. Wars interrupt the careful work. Political tensions make excavation difficult. Yet the archaeologists return when they can, drawn by the promise of more discoveries waiting beneath the sand. Modern techniques transform the work. Ground-penetrating radar reveals buried structures without disturbing the earth above them. Computer mapping creates detailed plans of the ancient city. Carbon dating provides precise ages for organic materials found in the ruins. The artifacts travel to museums around the world. The Pergamon Museum in Berlin displays a reconstructed Ishtar Gate, its blue walls rising in a climate-controlled hall. And visitors walk through the same gateway that once welcomed Babylonian kings and foreign ambassadors. Each discovery adds another voice to Babylon's chorus: a child's toy found in a house cellar, a woman's jewelry buried in a courtyard, a soldier's spear point lodged in a city wall. These small finds often tell bigger stories than the grand monuments. The work continues today, though more carefully than before. Modern archaeologists understand that excavation destroys even as it reveals. They leave portions of sites untouched, knowing that future techniques might extract information that current methods would miss. Digital archaeology now preserves discoveries in ways Koldewey could never have imagined. Three-dimensional scans capture every detail of artifacts. Virtual reality reconstructions let people walk through Babylon as it might have looked in Nebuchadnezzar's time. The dust still swirls on quiet mornings around the ruins. New discoveries wait beneath layers of earth and time. Each season brings possibilities, another tablet, another wall, another piece of the vast puzzle that was ancient Babylon. The archaeologists work on, patient as the desert itself, knowing that every careful brushstroke brings us closer to understanding the people who once called this place home. Their tools are simple: brushes, trowels, screens for sifting sand. Yet, their mission connects us across the centuries to voices that refuse to be forgotten. In museums and universities, scholars continue translating the tablets, deciphering royal inscriptions, piecing together the daily lives of ancient Babylonians. Each translation reveals new details about how they lived, what they believed, what they feared and hoped for. The work of archaeology is slow, methodical, reverent. It requires the patience of a gardener and the precision of a surgeon, yet the rewards are immeasurable. The recovery of lost worlds, the resurrection of forgotten voices, the bridge between then and now that helps us understand who we are and where we came from. Saddam's New Babylon. In the 1980s, under the burning sun of modern Iraq, an unusual construction project begins near the ancient ruins. Workers arrive with modern equipment, but their task seems pulled from history itself. They're rebuilding Babylon brick by brick on the orders of a dictator who sees himself as Nebuchadnezzar's heir. Saddam Hussein has grand visions dancing in his head. He imagines himself as Babylon's new king, restoring ancient Mesopotamia's glory under his rule. The project becomes his obsession, a monument to his own perceived greatness built on top of actual monuments from the past. The reconstruction begins with the palace complex. New walls rise alongside ancient foundations. Yet these walls tell a different story. Every few rows of traditional brick, workers insert modern bricks stamped with Saddam's name and the date. It's as if the dictator wants to ensure that future archaeologists will know exactly who rebuilt this place. The new palace gleams with marble floors and air conditioning, a strange mixture of ancient ambition and modern comfort. Saddam holds meetings here, receives foreign dignitaries in rooms overlooking the genuine Babylon's ruins. The contrast is jarring, power suits and briefcases in halls where cuneiform tablets once recorded king's business. Local workers find the project both fascinating and troubling. They're building on top of real archaeological sites, covering actual ancient remains with modern concrete and plaster. Professional archaeologists watch in dismay as bulldozers move through areas that haven't been properly excavated, destroying evidence that took millennia to accumulate. The reconstruction follows no historical accuracy. Walls appear where no walls existed in ancient times. Buildings rise in architectural styles that never graced the original city. It's Babylon filtered through one man's fantasy of what a great ruler's capital should look like. Gardens are planted where Saddam believes the hanging gardens might have stood. Palm trees and flowering bushes create shade and beauty, but they're arranged according to modern landscaping principles rather than any ancient design. Fountains splash and gurgle, fed by electric pumps rather than the ingenious hydraulic systems the Babylonians might have used. The ziggurat receives special attention. Workers build a new structure over the ancient foundations, creating a stepped pyramid that rises dramatically from the desert floor. It looks impressive from a distance, but up close, the modern materials and construction techniques are obvious. The bricks are too uniform, the mortar too perfect, the angles too precise for something genuinely ancient. Saddam commissions murals for the interior walls. These depict scenes from Babylonian history, but they're painted in a socialist realist style more appropriate to Soviet propaganda than ancient art. Nebuchadnezzar looks suspiciously like Saddam himself in some of the paintings, a not-so-subtle suggestion about who the real heir to Babylon's legacy might be. The Ishtar Gate gets reconstructed as well, though not on its original site. The new gate stands at the entrance to the palace complex, its blue bricks and golden animals gleaming in the desert sun, but the proportions are wrong. The colors too bright, the details simplified. It's like a theme park version of the real thing. International archaeological organizations protest the project. UNESCO expresses concern about damage to the actual ancient site. Scholars write letters and articles explaining how the reconstruction is harming our understanding of the real Babylon. Yet construction continues regardless. The project employs hundreds of local workers, providing jobs in a region where work is often scarce. Many of the craftsmen take pride in their skill, even if they question the project's wisdom. They learn traditional brickmaking techniques, practice ancient construction methods, develop expertise in working with clay and mortar. Saddam hosts festivals at his new Babylon, complete with performers in historical costumes and banquets served on replica ancient dinnerware. The events feel like historical reenactments crossed with political rallies. Guests praise the vision and ambition while privately wondering about the strange mixture of archaeology and propaganda. The palace becomes a working government facility. Ministers hold meetings in rooms decorated with reproductions of ancient Babylonian art. Bureaucrats shuffle papers in offices overlooking reconstructed ziggurats. It's a surreal blend of ancient grandeur and modern bureaucracy. Tourism to the site increases, though visitors often struggle to distinguish between the genuine ancient remains and Saddam's additions. Tour guides develop careful explanations about which walls are 2,500 years old and which were built during the reign of Iraq's modern dictator. The Iran-Iraq War interrupts construction at times, but work resumes when conditions allow. The project becomes a matter of national pride for some Iraqis, a symbol of their connection to the glorious civilizations that once flourished in their homeland. Archaeological damage from the reconstruction proves extensive. Ancient walls are covered with modern additions. Original foundations disappear beneath new structures. Context that took centuries to create gets destroyed in months of construction activity. The reconstruction remains unfinished when Saddam's regime ends in 2003. Construction equipment sits abandoned in the desert. Half-completed walls stand like broken teeth against the sky. The dream of a new Babylon fades as quickly as it began. What remains is a strange monument to ambition and ego, a place where genuine ancient history mixes uneasily with modern political theatre. The site continues to draw visitors, but now they come to see both the real Babylon and the peculiar legacy of a dictator who tried to make himself its inheritor. The city sleeps once more. Today, if you visit Babylon, you'll find a place where silence has returned. The tour buses that once brought visitors to Saddam's reconstruction come less frequently now. The guards, who once watched over the palace complex, have moved on to other duties. The ancient city settles back into the quiet rhythms of the desert. Goats wander through courtyards where kings once held council. Their hoofbeats echo softly on stones that witnessed the rise and fall of empires. A shepherd leads his small flock past walls built by Nebuchadnezzar, past gates where Daniel might have walked, past foundations that supported the dreams of the mighty. The Euphrates still flows nearby, though its course has shifted over the centuries. The river that gave birth to civilization continues its patient journey toward the sea, carrying silt and stories in equal measure. Date palms line its banks, their fronds rustling in the warm breeze like whispered conversations between past and present. Local families sometimes picnic among the ruins on Friday afternoons. Children play hide-and-seek behind ancient walls, while their parents spread blankets on ground that once echoed with the footsteps of prophets and poets. Their laughter mingles with the desert wind, adding new voices to a place that has heard so many voices across the ages. The reconstructed portions of Saddam's Babylon are showing their age. Paint peels from walls that were meant to last forever. Cracks appear in concrete that seemed so solid when first poured. Nature begins the slow process of reclaiming what humans tried to rebuild, just as it reclaimed the original city centuries ago. Archaeological work continues, but at a careful pace. International teams return when security conditions allow. Armed with new technologies and old patience, they work to separate the genuine ancient remains from the modern additions, trying to understand what Babylon was really like before politics and ego complicated the picture. The Site Museum, housed in one of Saddam's palace buildings, displays artifacts found during decades of excavation. Clay tablets covered with cuneiform writing sit in climate-controlled cases. Their wedge-shaped marks, still sharp after millennia. Jewelry, weapons, and household items tell stories of daily life in the world's first great city. Village women sometimes come to collect herbs that grow wild among the ruins. They know which plants are good for cooking, which ones help with headaches, which ones their grandmothers used for dyeing wool. Their knowledge connects them to generations of women who gathered plants in this same soil when Babylon was alive and bustling. The tourist infrastructure that once supported thousands of visitors has largely disappeared. Hotels stand empty, their rooms filled only with dust and memories of busier times. Restaurant owners in nearby towns speak wistfully of the days when archaeologists and visitors provided steady business. Security concerns keep many international visitors away. Though local Iraqi families continue to visit, they bring their children to see where their ancestors built one of humanity's first great civilizations. The pride in their eyes mixes with sadness at seeing such an important place so quiet and neglected. Bedouin occasionally camp near the ruins during their seasonal migrations. They pitch their black tents in the desert around Babylon, their camels grazing on scrub brush that grows between ancient foundations. At night, their cooking fires cast dancing shadows on walls built when the world was young. The famous Ishtar Gate, both the reconstructed version and the original ruins, stands patient in the desert light. The blue glazed bricks still catch the sun, their color as vibrant as ever. Lions and dragons march eternally along the walls, frozen in glazed clay, witnesses to the passing of empires and the endurance of art. Sunrise and sunset bring special beauty to the ruins. The low-angled light picks out details invisible during the harsh glare of midday. Shadows define the shapes of walls and courtyards, giving temporary form to spaces that once bustled with life. The desert reveals its subtle colors, dozens of shades of brown and gold and red. Rain, when it comes, transforms the sight completely. The usually dusty ground darkens and releases the sweet smell of wet earth. Puddles form in courtyards and reflect the sky, creating temporary mirrors that double the height of ancient walls. Steam rises from sun-warmed stones, creating an almost mystical atmosphere. Birds nest in crevices between ancient bricks. Their songs add life to the quiet ruins, a reminder that nature continues its cycles regardless of human ambitions. Lizards sun themselves on walls built by Hammurabi's architects. Their quick movements the only motion in otherwise still courtyards. The night sky above Babylon remains spectacular, unpolluted by city lights. The same stars that guided Babylonian astronomers still wheel overhead. The constellations they named and mapped continue their ancient dance, indifferent to the rise and fall of the civilizations that first learned to read their movements. Local guards make their rounds quietly, more protectors than enforcers. They know every stone, every wall, every corner of the site. Some have worked here for decades, watching seasons change and visitors come and go. Their presence ensures that Babylon remains safe, even in its sleep. The silence of modern Babylon is profound, but not empty. It's filled with possibility, with the weight of history, with the patient endurance of stones that have witnessed more human drama than any other place on earth. The city sleeps, but like all sleepers, it dreams. Babylon within our dreams. As darkness settles over the ancient ruins and modern cities alike, Babylon lives on in places that exist beyond geography and time. It breathes in the pages of holy books, stirs in the hearts of poets, and whispers through the collective memory of humanity. The physical city may sleep beneath Iraqi sand, but its soul wanders freely through our dreams and stories. In synagogues around the world, voices still chant the words written by exiles who sat by Babylon's rivers. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat and wept. The psalm echoes in Jerusalem and New York, in Buenos Aires and Mumbai, wherever people gather to remember how sorrow can transform into hope. The Hebrew words carry the weight of ancient tears and the lightness of eventual redemption. Churches preserve their own Babylonian memories. In stained glass windows, Daniel stands calm among the lions, while colored light streams across the faces of worshippers. Children learn the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, finding courage in the tale of three young men who refused to bow down. The fiery furnace becomes a symbol of faith, tested and found pure. Artists across centuries have painted their visions of Babylon. Pieter Bruegel's Tower of Babel spirals impossibly toward heaven, its architecture a mixture of Roman grandeur and Gothic fantasy. John Martin's dramatic canvases show the city in apocalyptic splendor, with lightning splitting dark skies above ziggurats that gleam like jewels. Each artist adds their own dreams to Babylon's endless story. Musicians hear Babylon's rhythms in their compositions. Verdi's Hebrew slaves sing of their homeland while working in Babylonian fields. Their chorus, one of opera's most moving laments. Bob Marley transforms the biblical imagery into reggae poetry, singing of Babylon as a symbol of oppression that must someday fall. The city's name carries different meanings for different voices, but it never loses its power to inspire. Writers find in Babylon a perfect metaphor for human ambition and its consequences. Science fiction authors imagine future Babylons among the stars, great cities that rise and fall on distant worlds. Fantasy novelists create magical kingdoms that echo the ancient city's grandeur and hubris. The patterns repeat, because the story of Babylon touches something deep in human nature. In the digital age, Babylon finds new life in video games and virtual worlds. Players build their own versions of the ancient city, complete with hanging gardens and towering ziggurats. They take on the roles of Hammurabi or Nebuchadnezzar, making decisions that shape the destiny of virtual civilizations. The city becomes interactive, responsive to choices made by people sitting at computers thousands of miles and years away from the original. Children still hear Babylonian stories at bedtime. Parents read picture books about the brave prophet in the lion's den, about the proud king who became humble, about the tower that tried to reach too high. The stories teach lessons about courage, humility, and the dangers of pride. They plant seeds that may bloom into deeper understanding years later. Scholars continue to study Babylon not just as an ancient city, but as an idea that has shaped human thinking. They trace its influence through literature and law, through art and architecture, through the development of urban civilization itself. Academic conferences bring together experts who debate Babylonian influence on everything from modern city planning to contemporary legal systems. The city appears in dreams, both sleeping and waking. Archaeologists dream of perfect excavations that reveal all of Babylon's secrets. Believers dream of walking with Daniel through palace corridors. Artists dream of seeing the hanging gardens in full bloom, their terraces cascading with flowers and running water. Each dreamer adds their vision to the city's endless resurrection. Modern Baghdad, built near ancient Babylon's ruins, carries forward something of the old city's spirit. Its markets buzz with the energy of commerce that once filled Babylonian streets. Its scholars continue the tradition of learning that made ancient Babylon a center of knowledge. The river that flows through both cities connects past and present with liquid threads. Babylon lives in the patterns we repeat without realizing. Every time we build a city, we echo ancient Babylon. Every time we create laws, we follow paths first traced by Hammurabi. Every time we reach for the stars, literally or figuratively, we repeat the gesture of the tower builders. The city's DNA runs through human civilization. In quiet moments, when the day's noise fades and night settles around us, Babylon whispers from the spaces between memory and imagination. It reminds us that all earthly cities are temporary, that all human achievements will someday sleep beneath the sand of time. Yet it also suggests that something endures beyond the physical. The stories we tell, the dreams we share, the hope that even broken things can be made beautiful again. The city appears differently to each person who encounters it. To some, it represents the dangers of unchecked power. To others, it symbolizes the heights human creativity can reach. To many, it offers both warnings and inspiration, showing how civilizations rise through cooperation and fall through pride. Babylon continues to build itself in human hearts, one story at a time, one dream at a time, one quiet moment of reflection at a time. The ancient city by the river has become eternal, not through the permanence of its stones, but through the persistence of human memory and imagination. As you drift toward sleep tonight, perhaps you'll dream of walking through Babylon's gates, hearing the whisper of wind through ruined walls, seeing stars wheel overhead just as they did when the city was young. In dreams, all cities are possible, all stories true, all endings open to hope. The ancient city sleeps, but it never stops dreaming. And in its dreams, it sees all the Babylons yet to come, all the towers yet to rise, all the gardens yet to bloom in the patient desert of human time.